Andre?
Hey guys, I'm still here.
listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back live from the divided states of America. It is time now for our last show of the week, our last 3 hours of the most disruptive show in American politics, in the politically independent corner. I am investigative radio show host and political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, your political analyst. I'm sorry, got a little mixed up in the beginning here. Let's try it again. And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
Together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And as we do every morning, here's the agenda. We're bringing you headlines 7, 8, and 9 a.m. Eastern. That's coming in just the first set is coming in just a couple seconds here. And after this first set, Jamarl does his monologue, and then we're taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number you should call. We'll be taking those in about 15 minutes. But without further ado, let's get into today's headlines. Well, the big one, and this will be quick, honestly. We're going to come back to this for Jamarl's monologue. Joe Biden accepted the Democratic Party nomination for president last night at last night's final night of the Democratic National Convention. He gave a widely approved, I'll say this, he gave a speech that was widely approved of. I've watched some of that, of course. And even Fox News has on its homepage right now that Fox's Chris Wallace said that Biden blew holes, quote, blew holes in Trump, specifically replacing Trump's caricature of a sort of time-addled president with an actual potentially viable political figure, which you would hope. I'm just saying. I'm not going to even say that Biden's a viable political figure, because I think all the stuff about him constantly committing gaffes and that stuff, that's all still true. There's nothing false there. But you at least hope that a major the Democratic Party, a major political party in the U.S., could put up a viable political figure. Apparently last night confirmed that for many people. So we'll come back to that again tomorrow. We'll be talking about that. The other big headline from yesterday that, of course, a lot of people are probably very curious about. One-time Trump campaign head Stephen K. Bannon has been arrested, along with 3 others, on charges of fraud. We mentioned this towards the end of the show yesterday. This is a big deal. Southern District of New York has indicted Bannon, along with Brian Colfage, Andrew Bottolato, and Timothy Shea, on charges that they defrauded donors to We Build the Wall. That is a group that raised about $25 million to build a several-mile stretch of wall along Texas's border with Mexico. The Justice Department claims that the group of 4 built hundreds of thousands of dollars from donors to support the, quote, lavish lifestyle, end quote, of Brian Colfage, who covertly took for his personal use more than $350,000 in funds. That is a quote from the Justice Department. Well, Bannon received over $1 million, at least some of which he used to cover hundreds of thousands of dollars of personal expenses. All 4 of those charged face one count each of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering, each of which carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. By the way, I have some quotes here. Maybe we can get into these later in the show. Inspector in charge, Philip R. Bartlett, just briefly, he's saying not only did they lie to donors, they schemed to hide their misappropriation of funds by creating sham invoices and accounts to launder donations and cover up their crimes, showing no regard for the truth or law. He continued, again, this is Inspector in charge, Philip R. Bartlett. This case should serve as a warning to other fraudsters that no one is above the law, not even a disabled war veteran or a millionaire political strategist, quote, end quote. That is especially interesting to hear because Bannon was reportedly arrested while on board a $28 million yacht stationed off the coast of Connecticut, owned by one Guo Wengui, an exiled Chinese billionaire and a close associate of Bannon's. We should talk about this again soon, by the way. He and Bannon, Guo Wengui and Bannon, were involved in a sort of attempt to create an alternative Chinese political system, basically to overthrow the Chinese government from the outside or something like that. We can talk more about that. It's not something I know well. Anyway, We're actually going to have former host of the show, Lee Stranahan, on at 8:15 this morning, talking about this story, giving us an update. He used to work for Bannon, so I'll put it that simply. They had a falling out. No longer a fan of Bannon's, and I'm sure Bannon is no longer a fan of his. But there was a. We'll talk about that stuff. We'll get into some of the facts about what happened. And a quick disclaimer: this is kind of a big story for another reason too. A former guest on this show, Dustin Stockton, again, a repeated guest on the show from back in the day. We haven't had him on a long time. Anyway, he and Jennifer Lawrence, his partner, were subpoenaed. Basically, a SWAT team came to their RV yesterday. They were subpoenaed on this case. Their phones were inspected, everything by the FBI, and they will be appearing before a grand jury in relation to this case. So again, a former guest on the show was subpoenaed. Apparently, they're saying federal officials that were responsible for handling this stuff were great to them, so there wasn't a dispute there. But anyway, full disclosure there. In our next story, fires in Central and Northern California have killed a handful of Californians and threatened tens of thousands of houses. California Governor Gavin Newsom addressed the wildfires in a short video recorded for the Democratic National Convention, telling viewers that if they, quote, are in denial about climate change, come to California, end quote. I can tell you it has been on and off hazy for weeks now. I'm sort of stationed in Southern California, and even though that's outside of where the really hard fires are hitting, it's been hazy. You can smell it. You go outside and it smells like smoke. In our next story, for the first time since the Great Depression, dual tropical systems are due to hit the U.S. at the same time and on the same day. Tropical depressions 13 and 14 of this season are due to hit this weekend through early next week. Each will be taking its own path through the Caribbean. Broadly, one will be hitting the Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana. Another is expected to sort of sweep up north of the Florida Panhandle up along the east coast of the U.S. Quick update here. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy will be testifying before Congress today, and we'll be coming back to that. He's saying he wants to push for sweeping changes after the election. He's coming under more scrutiny and criticism for that, of course, but we'll be talking about this in detail on Monday after he does this, when we're back on the air, with our guest Chuck Zlatkin, spokesperson for the New York Metro Area Postal Union. So we'll be talking about that with him. Good guest on that issue. And then last headline today, actually, I think Jamarl may have mentioned this briefly yesterday, but there's a new study out. Coronavirus may be even more contagious among kids. So in a study of children ages 0 to 22, doctors from Massachusetts General Hospital and Mass General Hospital for Children found that kids who tested positive displayed much higher levels of the virus in their airways than even adult ICU coronavirus patients. Lael Yonker, director of the MGH Cystic Fibrosis Center and the lead author of the study, said that she, quote, was not expecting the viral load to be so high. You think of a hospital and of all of the precautions taken to treat severely ill adults, but the viral loads of these hospitalized patients are significantly lower than a, quote, healthy child, end quote, who's walking around with a high SARS-CoV-2 viral load. That was all from Lael Yonker, again, director of the MGH Cystic Fibrosis Center. If kids spread COVID, if they spread the coronavirus at a much higher rate than adults, that significantly changed. If it's much worse, when people have sort of been assuming that if anything, it might be a little bit slower, the transmission might be a little bit lower among kids. If it's much worse, that probably changes things. We'll see how that changes things, but that would certainly change the conversation around reopening schools. Anyway, with that, we're through the headlines. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And Jamarl, straight back over to you. What is your top priority for the monologue today? You talking about Joe Biden?
We're talking about Joe Biden. We're going to talk about Joe Biden. Yeah, we're going to talk about Joe Biden. So I forced myself to watch 22 minutes of Joe Biden's speech, Platitude, Laden speech, and like Dean Winchester, breaking after 40 years in hell, I fell to my knees, dropped the cell phone, broken and hopeless. This speech was basically a signal of Joe Biden's intentions and what in that office and what he's offering in his pitch to America to choose him over Trump. This speech, honestly, in real terms, could have been done in maybe a minute or two. Here's what I offer you, America. Trump sucks and has singularly and uniquely ruined this country. I, Joe Biden, promise you, America, I will not be Trump as president of this uniquely supreme, indispensable nation. I will be Joe Biden. And then he says, thank you very much. And he walks off stage. First, in the wrong direction. And then he has to come back with people telling him, Joe, the other way, going across the screen in the other way. Listen to it for yourself. You have all of these people who are talking and screaming about how good the speech is. But honestly, it was a platitude-laden speech that didn't really deal with policy at all. And more than that, was an invocation of various feelings. Are you really hearing discrete policy descriptions as opposed to scam words to evoke feelings that ultimately don't mean anything? Not just not mean anything in real material terms, but what you're feeling as is invoked is not even universal. It's specific to you and your implicit ideas of whatever those words or whatever those ideas mean. It's nothing. I understand that the low bar of Joe Biden being able to stand there and give a speech without, going in the wilderness somewhere. People applaud that. I understand that Democrats may even look at this like the last night on Earth, like if an asteroid was coming and that guy who you would never in any way give attention to, that you would never even look at when you're crossing, you might give him a hi, but right now, it's the last night on Earth, and all of those guys' failings are now off the table, and you're going over to that apartment because you don't want to be alone. That's the speech. It's basically you're allowing, because of basically this is now Trump versus Biden, that Biden given a low bar, platitude-laden speech that didn't mean anything, and you're clapping for it because you need to clap for it because he's going up against Donald Trump. That's what this is. Here's the thing. This speech was a poor man's hope and change. And I got to be honest, not entirely even a good one. Even the pretext of the speech, as if we're unified, is to some degree manipulative. Being unified is rather difficult, if not impossible, when the gross disparities of outcomes are visited on the various people of the society. And like I said, gross disparities, they're inequities. The billionaire class, the stock market, and the managerial class, all doing fine. Bezos and the Waltons are nearly up $1 trillion in winnings, with 30 million people out of work, millions to be dragged from their homes, and those are, believe it or not, happening right now, and let alone millions losing their health care. You, sir, sat in a room, private, with a bunch of oligarchs and told them nothing will change. Not to mention you're already walking back the meager items in your primary, even on the issues of health care and that public option. Your buyers have nothing in common with that 70-year-old mentioned by the New York Times standing in a block log line alone at a food bank, hoping that she can get meat this time around because she wasn't necessarily able to get it last time. For that matter, even the disparity in deaths. Our various environments determine our needs, and discussing one as if we're one thing is just fraudulent on its face. The invocation of civil rights is uniquely offensive to me. You went around in your campaign in 2020 telling people that you were part of the civil rights. You were helping get these churches out of from being segregated. That's a lie. The media, Sanders, nobody ever called it a lie. I know it's a lie because in the 80s you said it was. You said I was not doing that. In fact, in the 80s you had to drop out of that campaign for lying, either on the civil rights issue, either on plagiarizing those speeches. And the fact that you're doing it again in 2020 gets across that you're still that same liar from back in the 80s. So even the platitudes in this, I can't take with any level of realness. The tokenization of George Floyd, bringing up the little girl and his family, missing that you, the Biden crime plan, you constructed the meanness and the mean-spiritedness that was in our criminal justice system going from the top. That system that killed him is the exact system you created. And yet now, you will invoke that. Last man on earth. This is the guy you got to go with. You can't pretend that you can't pay attention to that stuff. No, you should pay attention to that stuff. Even the idea of climate. This speech was basically a real specific idea on who Joe Biden is going to be in that presidency. And like I said in the beginning, I'm just going to be Joe Biden. I'm not offering you anything. That's why I'm not saying anything in the speech. And you are now stuck with me versus Trump. And so anything you even thought I might have said in the primary is now out of the window. The media will say that's a tack back. You say, what's the tack back? That's the maneuver when the candidate, any modest thing that they said in the primary now is out the window because you're stuck between him and Trump. And you have nowhere else to go. And his walkbacks will be less, you'll be less bothered by. because those news ideas and policies and everything else he was talking about in the primaries, well, now he's up against Trump. And your focus and attention is now on that contest. Policy be damned. And so he would get to the presidency, if he does, and any notion of policy, well, that was months ago. You can't hold me to that. And not just not hold me to that, the presidency or the race itself takes on a different contour where you are basically just fighting mano a mano with the other guy. The policies, the stuff that he talked about in the primaries will be forgotten. This is how politics is done when you have nowhere else to go and you have no leverage in the process. This was Joe Biden's speech. The speech was basically signifying, I am just going to be Joe Biden, whatever that means, in that office. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And yeah, it is a betrayal of America considering everything that is going on right now. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak: The Deadliest Epidemics in Human History, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're
welcome back to Fault Lines.
Two Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're taking calls this segment, 202-521-1320. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We have Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on?
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. I got 5 quick comments. Okay, pandemicseries.com. I saw it on with Del Beatree and the guy that produced it yesterday on the High Wire. I didn't, but I attached the link to y'all tweet for today. It's underneath y'all tweet for today. Pandemicseries.com. Stella Morris, Julian Assange's wife, is she sent out a GoFundMe thing for people to help out. It's not GoFundMe, but for people to donate to his campaign, his thing for to stop the extradition. I attached that link for your tweet today. A story out of Australia that vindicates the Sweden and Switzerland herd immunity thing, and with Switzerland, they had got away from hydroxychloroquine for 2 weeks on May 25th when that Lexington study came out. Then when the Lexington study was pulled, they went back on it. Within the 2 weeks when they got off the hydroxychloroquine, the death rate with people with COVID-19 went up. Then when they got back down, then it went back down. I mean, when they got back on it, the death rate went down. I got another thing dealing with James Turduru, MD, dealing with the countries that use hydroxychloroquine. Death rates are down compared to people who's not using it. The death rate is up. And another one dealing with test results from around the world dealing with trials to using hydroxychloroquine that I got to post it to y'all thing today underneath James
Todaro. Thank you. Yeah, James Todaro. I've checked his out. I'm going to jump in now. Thank you, Tarif. I both saw you posting those this morning, and I've seen this guy in the past. I haven't paid too close attention, but he's one of these people who keeps showing back up. He talks about hydroxychloroquine. Looking around recently, James Todaro has been talking about T-cell immunity and this idea that people are already a little bit more immune than they would think because of partial immunity, I think, from other coronaviruses and other related sort of similar viruses. And what he's saying about herd immunity, as far as I can tell, is instead of the 50 to 60% herd immunity that we think we would need to really slow the spread, he's saying you need more like 10 to 20, which we're actually already seeing, and which would explain why the spread seems to have slowed in a lot of places. I don't know. It'd be better to have him on the air. There's some problems with that. I don't have too much time to get into it right this second. And I'm a little bit out of my depth with that. But just multivariables. Why Sweden, for instance, why Sweden has compared the way that it has, and why death rates seem pretty high in some countries that seem to have had dramatically higher levels of infections than others. Why the death rate basically between countries isn't consistent. Again, he's talking about T-cell immunity. That's just a related thing about herd immunity and stuff. I'm just curious how that relates. You'd think that as different countries, anyway, you'd think that as different countries hit this point, they would sort of be able to, number of cases, number of new infections, number of new deaths, most of all, would go down. And you'd think that would be mostly consistent between countries. But instead, you have this intense variation where the U.S. is being hit extremely hard. And then, other countries, Mexico, Brazil, UK, also hit pretty damn hard. And then there's just this long tail. What exactly determines that? If it's the masks, then that's one thing. If it's herd immunity, then that's another thing. But there's a bunch of sort of competing evidence between what exactly is causing it. Anyway, Tarif, thank you for the call. If the pandemic thing is the same thing as the pandemic movie, I don't know. I don't think that stuff should have been pushed off. I don't think it should have been deleted from YouTube. But I also, from what I saw of it, I watched it, looking into it. I don't remember buying into it. Anyway, Jamarl, what's your take?
No, I don't have one. Honestly, I don't.
All right, fair enough.
We were talking about Biden, and now we're talking about hydroxychloroquine again. So no, I don't have a take on hydroxychloroquine.
Fair enough. All right, we're taking calls 202-521-1320. All right, about Biden. I don't know. I can tell there's something. You sound a little bit melancholy, Jamarl. You sound kind of deeply sad.
It's melancholy. Look. I think I look at this, and I take what the candidate. Look, I take what we have as leverage, and I take what the candidate is saying. And if your leverage is zero, then the candidate can say anything he wants. That's the rule of power of sorts. Joe Biden right now, it's between him and Trump. And all of these people who might have been lefties, all of these people who might have wanted real things, I mean, for God's sake, you have 72% of the country want to expand Social Security, 69% want Medicare for all, 67% want $15 an hour minimum wage, 67% want to legalize marijuana, 64% want to tax Trump extreme wealth, or people like Trump, I suppose, and 63% want a Green New Deal, 58% want to cancel all student debt. Joe Biden is for none of that. And you have zero leverage. And that speech that he basically gave that had no policy, that was entirely platitudes, was basically, I'm going to be Joe Biden, whatever that means. Whether that's foreign policy, whether that's something else. And you're going to love me for it because you're going to love my apathy. And I think that's a horrible, horrible position for the country to be in. And look, the country could say, we don't accept this, and you will lose if you don't attend to the needs of the country in the middle of multiple crises. But they're not going to do that. They're so terrified of Trump. And what Joe Biden does now, they're going to love. Any gaffe that he makes, they're going to ignore. His failings, the lies, all of this stuff, all of these things just get thrown out the window now, and they're going to love Joe Biden as the last horrible man on earth that just so happened is across the hall that you got to sleep with in order to, make the night just that much better. I think that's a horrible position. I don't see any hope in that position. Either one is bad. And so it's like, yeah, I'm going to have to now listen to all of these people, a guy who is, a flagrant liar. And I don't think that much better than what is going to take place with Trump. And they're going to push, and they're going to scream, and they're going to argue, and they're going to wag their finger that even if you're not a Democrat, you're for some reason not supposed to vote Democrat. And that's going to be what our next few years are like. And then Joe Biden's going to get in office, and he's going to try to take it back to the Obama era. There's no thrill in that. None.
The problem is that it's an empty fanaticism. I mean, the problem is that to whatever extent there is a fanaticism, and I don't even really think there is, there's more just a panic, a sort of slow, partially intentionally induced, partly artificial panic, but partly a natural one from the virus and everything. But there's been a panic, an artificial panic for years and years and years now about Trump, where Trump, for all the bad stuff that he built, for when Michelle Obama specifically was up there on the stage criticizing Trump for putting kids in cages. I mean, Obama was the one who built those cages. You can't get around that. So the system has had its problems. The artificial sense of panic that was induced to try to push Trump out and keep Trump from getting certain policies enacted, that's definitely not been helping things. But here's my point: it's an empty panic in the sense that, and really what you get in response to that panic, if you create that panic in order to mobilize people, in order to mobilize voters, to mobilize some grassroots political whatever you're trying to do, more the first than the second, definitely. But if you're trying to organize people through a panic, what you'd want is somebody who can lead them effectively in that panic, and that will turn their desire to follow, which most people have when they're in a crisis. They want somebody who can help them out, help them make sense of things. That will if they had a competent leader to follow, you would have a sort of viable, stable political movement. As it is, it's empty. As it is, Biden is a sort of empty opposition to Trump, which is an empty fear. And therefore, in some sense, it seems like a very easy panic. It's a very easy fanaticism specifically to co-opt or to take over, to subvert. When I look at Biden, that's really what I see. People are not. We talk about taking down statues and these other sort of symbolic modes of fixing our problems. Biden is the symbolic solution to a symbolized problem. The problem has been overstated, and the solution has been overstated too. You see what I'm saying? Like you can look at this from this sort of Hegelian perspective, this Hegelian dialectic thing, where if you make Trump a huge boogeyman, and we've talked about this with Bernie and how Bernie got pushed out of the DNC and how he might have used this as justification. But if you just look at Biden, if you make Trump a huge boogeyman, then what you have to do is inflate your guy. Either find a really, really good person, man or woman, to stand up against your monster, or you have to make the person that you already have seem really, really great. And that's what we're in right now, is Democratic voters have to simultaneously hold their nose and ignore the travesty of the person that they put into office, who despite last night's speech is still, for anybody who's been watching pretty constantly, a travesty. They have to simultaneously hold their nose and commit to that cognitive dissonance at the same time as they have to agitate so damn hard against Trump, while realizing, of course, that the person that they're supporting can't actually get what they want. They don't like Biden. I mean, everybody knows that. That for the most part, it's a concession. It's even Obama hesitated until the last minute to actually throw his weight behind Biden in the primary process. I mean, the person who everybody was waiting for with bated breath at the convention now waited until the last possible minute to approve the guy, which isn't exactly the most, startling approval. It's just it's a mess, man. My point is it's empty. And so if the support for Biden is empty, then that leads me to wonder, where will that go in a year if he loses? Where will that go in 4 years if he wins? Whether he lives until 2024 or not, if he wins or loses, it's just going to be interesting, man. This is frustrating. And for the DNC, I want to come back just real briefly. There's something exciting about this moment for people. If you're a liberal, if you're a progressive, whatever, there is something exciting about this. Even though this seems like the sort of the nadir, it might be the zenith of potential. Even though it seems like you're further than ever from accessing the platform, this might be the moment of its most brittleness, of its greatest weakness. I don't know. What's your take on that, Jamarl? We've only got a minute before we go into a break. But
I've heard people say that. Like, that basically, I think if Biden loses, yes. I think if Biden loses, that's a hopeful moment. We've gone so far that in this direction that there's no magical door out of it. And what I mean by that is, if you acquiesce and give up all of your, give it away for free, the docility and everything else, they accept that and expect that, and to some degree just kind of plan policy and everything else in order to get that. If Biden wins, I think all of the energy gets sucked out of it. If Biden loses, I think the energy is not just there, but it becomes overwhelming in the sense that something has to fundamentally change when you can't beat this guy and you lose him twice. That's my thought. But let's take us to a break. You guys are listening to Thomas and Stranahan. This is Fault Lines. We'll be back in a moment. Or I should say, this is Fault Lines. This is Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik.
Hello, Peter.
Yeah.
We got you scheduled.
You're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are thankful for the fact that we have Peter Lavelle with us. We're going to be talking about the Democratic National Convention, Biden as a president, Harris as a vice president. We're also going to be talking about protests in Belarus, probably. But Peter Lavelle, host of Crosstalk on RT. Peter, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm always very, very pleased to be with you. I'm doing fine. I'm still on vacation, so I have nothing to complain about.
Glad to hear you're on vacation. I hope you're having a great time. Although it can't be too deep a vacation because you're joining us, and I don't know that constitutes entertainment. Still, very glad to have you.
It's always thought-provoking, and that's most important.
I hope so, and more so that we have you with us. But we're talking about. Let's start it off with this. What did you think of last night's speech? What did you think of Biden? You're looking at it. Don't know where you're vacationing. Last I heard, you were in Russia, so you're an ocean away. But still, what did you think about what's going on in the States? And what did you think about what Biden was saying about his prospects, how he did all that stuff? What do you think about this?
What he had to say was completely vacuous in my mind. Okay, a hat tip to the speechwriter. The very fact that he got through it, I think that's the news. And it's good. It's a little bit more difficult to say slow Joe, but I mean, the content of it is all of the speeches were virtue signaling. They had very little to do with policy. It's a beauty contest, and the bad orange man. I mean, that's not politics. That's not policy. So we just got a badly choreographed week-long infomercial. So, but hat tip to Biden, he got through it. Okay, that's how low we've lowered the bar.
Peter, I think that's absolutely right. Oh, go Shane. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Just very briefly, and then I'll pass it back to you, Jamarl. That you were talking about the use the word infomercial, and that actually does. There's another way of seeing this that kind of reminded me of this other way. It's almost like Good Morning America or something. Like the way that they're bringing these clips in. I've watched Good Morning America just a few times, thankfully. I have family watch it sometimes. It's been years, but anyway, the way that they're bringing these clips in, the way that everything is done digitally, of course, not in person. Because there can't be a convention because of COVID. It's just weird. It has this weird, very 2020. It feels like the year that we're living in. I don't know. Anyway,
I think we should expect the same thing from the GOP next week, or maybe they've learned a few lessons of what not to do. But we're in the middle of a pandemic. There is a extreme economic turndown for tens of millions of Americans, and they have these cheesy music clips that they throw into the middle of it. I don't think that the convention gave the gravity of what's going on. I don't think it represents a lot of it didn't represent progressives, and progressives, as much as I disagree with them on many points, they're policy wonks like me. And we need policy right now. We don't need to feel good through identitarian politics and this virtue signaling, night in and night out. It doesn't reflect the gravity of the hour of what's facing the country.
Peter, I called it a betrayal. I think that was the way I described the speech. I thought it was a betrayal of the United States, of Americans. I am one of those lefties, and I'm pretty sure we disagree on a lot of points, but you're right. I'm a policy wonk. Because you're feeling, and you telling me something that makes me feel a particular way, doesn't really get to the heart of what's bothering me. You know what I mean? If I'm out of a job, you virtue signaling me doesn't really do it. And you're talking about millions, tens of millions of people that are out of jobs, millions of people who are out of healthcare. By the way, millions who are sick and who now have healthcare bills because they had one of these other issues that were associated with COVID, or COVID made the condition that much worse. Those are things that have to be done by policy, not through this notion of feeling. That, I think, is what aggravated me more than anything else about the speech. What was the thing about the speech that I guess stuck out to you more maybe than anything else? All of it was platitudes, but is there something where you looked at it and said, okay, that right there is giving me some indication of what Biden is going to do in that office when he gets in?
Well, I'll probably be too specific for you, but this democracy dies in the dark. Well, the administration that Joe Biden was a part of tried to overthrow the democratic will of the American people after the 2016 election. So nobody at the DNC has any right to talk about democracy in America. And I'm hopeful that we'll have these investigations wrapped up before the election, and there will be indictments of people that tried to subvert democracy. So anyone in the DNC talking about how Trump is destroying democracy is, I can't say it on your radio program, but that really infuriated me. It's insulting, okay? Democracy is under threat, okay? It's threat all across the country, and it's a donor's democracy. We're in a pandemic and you can't talk about healthcare. That's because of the donors. And we're going to see the same thing next week with the GOP.
What I could have, so there was the Settle for Biden movement. There was a little political activism movement. I'm sure you saw this, Peter Lavelle,
yeah.
Settle for Biden. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. And that felt that there was something ironic about that. Of course, there's something kind of quirky and weird. But that felt accurate. That felt one level closer to reality. It seems like we're back to with the Democratic National Convention, which seems to again successfully have just wrapped up. I'll add, a lot of the sort of establishment news outlets are saying that Biden took this, that as far as it goes, it revealed that he's a viable candidate in 2020. We'll see about that, of course. What I would have wanted, what would have felt closer to reality even than Settle for Biden, is if like Tom Perez or somebody like that in the DNC, who like you're not used to seeing, but like a party dude, the internal party mechanics dude, was like came out and you're like, Biden obviously not a great candidate, not a perfect candidate, but he's the best we've got. Here's what we're doing. Trump is running things horribly. We have a 12-point plan. Here's what we want to pass. With Biden's help, with your help, we want to do this. If there were good stuff on that bill, I don't know. My point is, you could have another version of politics that's real about itself. But we're watching this in the middle of this unprecedented time. You're right. Their rhetoric does not match the reality that we're living in. It's so discordant. And all I would want, all I could really hope for, is for them to be realistic about the person that they're pushing and what they can do with him. But they're not. And that means that if they win, I don't see them being any more successful at getting what they want in Congress or in the White House than Trump, frankly, has been over the past 4 years. It's just more loggerheads. It's more systemic decay. That's what I'm afraid of.
We know what we're going to get. Joe Biden was vice president for 8 years. Look at all of the people surrounding Biden. What we're basically being told, settle for the status quo. Because you know what? The DNC and their donors, they're just fine, if not richer, after this pandemic and economic turndown. The status quo is just fine. No, what I call it was the whole convention was suck it up. It was the middle finger convention saying the status quo, neoliberalism works for us, maybe not for you. But you know what? You don't have much say in it, okay? I found the entire convention insulting, totally insulting to the realities that are facing average Americans. And again, I want to be very fair. I don't think we're going to get much better from the GOP because Trump ran as a populist. He's governed as a Bush Republican.
I think that's the wild part because they keep arguing. Basically, the Democratic argument is Trump is uniquely horrible and the world fell off its axis the day that Trump got in office. And all of that, for the most part, has been used to justify, like you said, the soft coup in 2016 when they would necessarily accept Trump. I think Trump is grotesque. And yet I thought what took place regarding this demonization of Russia, this demonization of China right now, and with Trump, the demonization of immigrants, meaning it's everybody else's fault. All of our issues are pertaining to somebody else. Even this president that got in office used the foreign power to do it. And despite the fact that the Mueller report and all of these other investigations basically show that's not true, despite Roger Stone being prosecuted, literally prosecuted, for lying about being a link, meaning there was no link. It doesn't matter. They still go on this very specific argument when it's aimed at Trump. They're doing it right now with this kind of new Senate report stuff. And you're right. You know, all of the problems and everything else that the American public is dealing with, even before this took place, were being put under the rug in lieu of this kind of investigation. And now you have the opportunity to actually choose somebody and actually directly deal with the various failures of our system. They put up Joe Biden, a man who basically did a speech basically saying, I'm going to govern as I govern. And people are like, what does that mean? It means I'm Joe Biden. What's going to look like after 4 years of Joe Biden, Peter? Meaning, say Joe Biden gets in office. What does it look like?
Maybe we should ask Kamala Harris what that will be like, okay? And maybe we should ask the people that Wall Street will choose for his cabinet. This is what's going to happen here. I mean,
by the way, just to interject for a moment, just like Obama, when Citigroup chose his cabinet, despite him being on the campaign trail, attacking Wall Street.
Exactly. You know what's really irritating is that there are answers out there. I mean, you make it sound like, it's all insolvable, okay? No, it is solvable. Actually, a lot of these things could be easily taken care of. A massive cut to the defense spending, turn it into infrastructure, create jobs programs. I'm saying this as a conservative, but that's what you need government for. That's what government should do when there's an emergency. Government is that's you're calling 911. We need help, and that's what they should be doing right now. And infrastructure, for my goodness, I travel all around the world. Infrastructure in America is an embarrassment. But, we don't have any money.
And that was
the biggest myth of this neoliberal agenda was exposed when they did the stimulus bailouts. Okay. Oh, there's plenty of money, apparently. There's plenty of money out there. You can't say that anymore. You can't say we don't have any money. Because they made sure that their friends and donors and special interests, they got paid off. Now, but the working class didn't.
That's the weird thing about whether it was the 2008 crisis or now a little over a decade later, you have trillions of dollars getting thrown around. Apparently, most of it ending up in the hands of people, in the pockets of people who don't need any more of it. So you have that happening, and then of course everybody who's watching wonders, where the hell is that going? If you can do that, asking the government, if you can do that, why aren't you doing that for me? And the government never seems to have a good answer to that question. So that's, again, where we are now. But I mean, Peter, you were talking about there are answers out there. You started with reducing the defense bill. Sure, if you're starting with the budget, if you're starting looking at our deficit, and heck, if you're starting looking at our political constitution or the nature of America and whether it should be this massive interventionist imperialistic power, either of those sides, whether it's pragmatism or idealism, I think the answer is no. We should stop. We should pull out of some of that stuff. But what you go up against, what you very quickly run up against, is the weight and the motivations and momentum of the machine itself, which seems to have its own agenda, its own culture, and its own way of solving problems. How do you solve that? What's your take on dealing with that?
What about democracy? We've had prior to this election cycle, we had 3 election cycles where the public rejected foreign wars and interventions. We had 3 elections on that. And what happens? The interagency consensus you come up against. Well, this is why we need someone like Donald Trump, a disruptor that owes nothing to anyone. And he didn't do it. He got sucked into it. As a matter of fact, the irony of ironies is that he did more or less exactly what they told him to do, and then they knife him in the back at the same time. I mean, this is the dilemma of empire. Empires don't know how to downsize. They only know one direction until they get a really rude wake-up call. The British got it in the First World War. Is the United States going to have a Waterloo in the South China Sea? It's very possible. Empire is something that it has no self-awareness, and it has a sense of just gross inertia. And in the case of the United States, the American public is barely aware of it because the young men and women that die in uniform around the world, they're poor people. And who cares about poor people? They have no power. That's by design. That's by design. And then you have, the getting out of Afghanistan. Oh no, that's too much of a gravy train. I mean, just look at gasoline itself. Tens of millions of dollars of gasoline are sent to Afghanistan for American soldiers and probably the contractors, but it's sold all over the Middle East at huge markups, and they know it. But it's just the way it goes, okay? I mean, there's so many ways you can cut back on that, and you know what? At the end of the day, it does not secure American national interests whatsoever. As a matter of fact, being in so many places around the world, you are actually inviting conflict. And the architects
Peter,
of this
let's
know
take a
that.
quick break. I want to come back on that very specific point, the invitation of conflict through the perspective or the modus operandi of a particular country, as opposed to being the peacemakers. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment. You've been listening to Peter Lavelle. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. We are here speaking with Peter Lavelle, host of Crosstalk on RT and American journalist. Peter, I've loved this interview. And I think, even though you consider yourself a conservative, and I consider myself a lefty, or I just kind of am a lefty, I am what I am. But in this very specific case, I think we're hitting on something that I think is right. Why do you think the American public is so out of touch on all of these issues, or many of these issues? And I got to be honest, I'm not even sure if they're out of touch in as much as they don't believe there's an alternative. When you ask the public, again, 72% want to expand Social Security, 69% want Medicare for all, 71% 15 minimum wage, 67% legalize marijuana, 64% tax billionaires streaming wealth, 64% support unions, 63% Green New Deal. This is a pretty clear signal of what the American public want, and explicitly what they are not going to get, either under Biden or under Trump. That's bizarre, especially if you're talking about a democracy or representative government, where you have the public saying, we want these things, and your political device, even the device that's supposed to represent that lefty aspect of the public, says no. How are they so out of touch, and how are they so powerless, or at the very least perceive themselves as powerless in this situation? I mean, whether it's foreign policy or whether it's here in the United States.
Most importantly, the media. I mean, they're the ones that peddle these things. I mean, look at MSNBC. I mean, during this election cycle, it was verboten to say anything nice about Bernie Sanders. As a matter of fact, you weren't supposed to say anything at all. I mean, the media has a stake in this, okay? And they know what the owners want. They know what the political class wants, and they always will curry favor for them. So they have no interest in giving any kind of alternative view. All of the things that you just mentioned. As a conservative, I can talk to you about any and all of those things. It's about how we get it done. That's the difference we have. It's how we get it done. Because everything that you mentioned are majoritarian ideas. Okay, I mean what is it's hilarious at the same time it's tragic is that we're in the middle of a pandemic and we don't talk about healthcare. I mean, what's going on here? Because
I don't even think they mentioned it.
The whole country's gaslit. Okay, and the pathetic response, and I'm not just putting this at the door of Donald Trump. I mean, there are 50 governors as well. And this pandemic has been politicized, okay? So you don't talk about what's really important. What about a working wage? I mean, my goodness, maybe I'm all naive and everything, but if you gave people more money per hour for work, they probably spend more money and, create more wealth in the country. I mean, these things are not particularly difficult, okay? But it goes against the vested interests of the people that run these two fake political parties. I mean, people are always surprised by my behavior, but I'm not a libertarian. And libertarianism is so powerful among the elites, particularly in the GOP. And that has created a dysfunctional party, okay? And then the empire is just, it's just a machine that generates huge profits for a small number of people. And that's why, look at the average congressperson or senator. They spend like 86% of their time on the phone talking to donors. I mean, some of them don't even visit their home districts or states, okay? Because they're on call. They're on call for the people that make their lives easy. Oh, and when they retire, I mean, Mitch McConnell, let's say he loses. Oh, he'll be sitting on 5 or 6 boards making 7 digits a year. I mean,
Eric Cantor,
no doubt doing nothing.
Eric Cantor, right here in Virginia, lost his race. I can't think of the guy's name, Brad something. Eric Cantor is sitting on, one of these financial things, getting a ton of cash, working for one of these financial companies. He served them well. Here's your reward, sir.
I mean, you know what government service is at that level? It's accumulating a Rolodex. That's what it is. It's a Rolodex. And then when your party comes back into power, maybe they'll throw you something, and you can use that position to transact the next gig when you leave government. I mean, government service is just a way to generate cash. Who has any ideas anymore? I mean, there are populists on the left and right that have ideas, but they don't have power, and that is intentional. That's intentional. Don't give them power. I mean, the DNC, the Democrats, did you notice that in the evening they had, people, respectable Democrats talking to the public, but then during the day you had all the loonies, okay? There's no unity in that party at all. And what they do is they say, well, we'll let you speak. You can speak at 1 o'clock in the afternoon when people are watching soap operas. Okay. Yeah. I mean, people worrying, that Kamala Harris is this really crazy left winger. No, she's not. And I think a lot of people would love left winger. They really would. But she's a neoliberal. Okay.
He was chosen for that reason, by the way, Peter. I mean,
the markets went up.
Yeah, she's not a left winger at all. I mean, she went for Medicare for All, backed away. The woman is a cop. And
the only version of this, I've heard that makes. No, sorry, Jamarl. No, it sounded like you were.
No. Go for it.
I've heard that it sounds like it makes some sense, and even then it doesn't. But that it sounded like, okay, this is at least closer to something that makes sense. Is okay, maybe Joe Biden specifically, but hey, throw Harris in there too. Maybe they lack the vitality to restrain the youthful, vibrant teenagerly or 20-somethings or whatever who are going to revolutionize the party. But that doesn't make any sense either, because of course there's an entire party machine, and full of people from their 20s through their 60s or 90s or whatever, who which is itself that machine, of course, is itself bent on keeping out any. And it's not even progressive, like you're saying, Peter. It's more just majoritarian. It's more of these sort of neutral things that probably 70 to 80% of people would agree with on some form, and you might give some details and they would change their mind maybe, but with some other details they say yes. For a lot of these things, healthcare, that totally applies. Why isn't that?
They always have a trick for you when they say, oh, but don't you know how much it would cost? Well, I can guarantee you with great confidence that the United States could have twice the quality of its healthcare for half the price. Okay, right. And that's for everyone, not for illegal immigrants, not for illegal aliens. No. For American citizens, okay, it would be half the cost. And they have all of these think tanks all across America, ginning up these studies saying, no, that's not true. Well, they're lying to you because they have a vested interest in lying to you. Because big pharma won't be big pharma anymore. Big hospitals won't be big hospitals anymore. It'll just be something that is generated for the health care of the population, like everywhere else in the industrialized, developed world.
Peter, I want to jump in here because I want to get to Belarus. So this is like a hard pivot to Belarus. I've been fascinated by what is taking place there. I am a sucker for, look, I played chess my entire life. And politics and this stuff kind of goes in line with what people want, what people are trying to get, especially in the context of conflicts. And sometimes those are sublime in the way that they happen. Right now, in Belarus, Lukashenko, who has been there, basically, they said the last dictator of Europe, if they want to describe him as that. But he is under pressure right now. Under normal circumstances, as I understand it, Belarus was close with Russia. And over the last few years, he's been playing one against the other. In this very specific instance, he has made the point that says, look, Russia is going to help us with security here. And protests have basically racked the country. From my understanding, the protests haven't necessarily been violent. But can you give us an update on what is going on, not just from the standpoint of the protests themselves, but even from the standpoint of how he's considering this and how he got himself into this, for all of these people basically screaming to rip him out of office. And I know there was an election there, but I'm talking about more in broad terms in regards to how did this moment happen beyond just that election? How did this moment in the Belarus happen? And honestly, is there anything in this point for Russia to do to prevent that? And is that even Russia's point of view in this situation? Because from my point of view, if Belarus falls, that is another country on the border of Russia, just like Ukraine. And it seems like something would have to be done, if it was me anyway, and I was trying to create buffer zones between countries that I thought was hostile to me. Well, Belarus is a country that's hostile to me, regardless of what's in its constitution. The constitution in this case doesn't really matter if the country falls in a way of, let's say, tilt its tenor. So can you give us a basic update on what is going on and how did it get to this particular situation? And if Russia, if at all, is going to get involved in any real way?
Okay, well, that's about 37 questions. I'll try to get.
I know. I'm sorry.
It's all right. First of all, of course, what happens in Belarus is very important to Russia because it's on Russia's border. Number two, Belarus is in a number of security agreements and treaties with Russia. Number three, Lukashenko's Belarus is still very state-driven as far as the economy is concerned. And one of the quirks of the ending of the Soviet Union is that Belarus ended up with a very high-tech, very modern refinery sector. And so Russia, through its largesse, has provided Belarus with very cheap petroleum, and Lukashenko has been able to export it for a nice markup. To help subsidize what is basically a still state-driven economy. Well, oil prices are down, demand is down, and he doesn't have all that extra change in his pocket anymore. He's been there too long for the likes of most people. He is quite autocratic. He does try to play Russia against the West, and this time he's annoyed both to no end. Russia has made it very clear to the Europeans that they should mind their own business. They don't need a regime change there. But I'll tell you something that's very important that Western media won't talk about, is that this is not Georgia and it's not Ukraine. There is no anti-Russian sentiment in Belarus. They're frustrated with how the economy is run, and the economy is run by one man, or virtually one man, and that's the president. So they're saying we need reforms, we need to be more efficiency, higher productivity. But you see the frustration for the regime changers in Washington D.C. is they can't play the anti-Russia card like they did in Ukraine or like they did in Georgia, because that's not what it's all about. I mean, the intermarriage between Russians and Belarusians is really intense. So I know you probably had Dmitry Babich on. Well, his wife is Belarusian, and he goes to Belarus all the time to visit family. So I had lunch with him 2 days ago, and he was telling me that this anti-Russia card just isn't going to work because they're not that way. Russia is not going to intervene. Stay away from the scaremongering that you get in Western media. That's the last thing they want to do. And Lukashenko might be, on the other hand, want to invite the Russians in, which I don't think the Russians will say, you made this mess and now you clean it up. So any government that would come in after Lukashenko, I don't think is going to be anti-Russian. There's no evidence that it would be, because it would be against the expressed will of the vast majority of the population.
Peter Lavelle, let's stop it here. I appreciate that. I did pepper you with questions on that one, so you're absolutely right. But you answered it magnificently. I thank you very much. You guys have been listening to the voice of Peter Lavelle. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the politically independent corner, I'm on a plane, your investigative radio show host and political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. In the news, let's get to some headlines. Joe Biden accepted the Democratic Party nomination last night, final night of the Democratic National Convention. He gave a widely approved speech, with even Fox News having on its homepage right now that Fox's Chris Wallace said that Biden blew holes in Trump, specifically replacing Trump's idea of a slow or sleepy Biden. That is a low bar, but that is the bar that Chris Wallace found that Joe Biden was able to get over. One-time Trump campaign head Stephen K. Bannon has been arrested along with 3 others on charges of fraud. The Southern District of New York has indicted Bannon along with Brian Koflich, Andrew Badalado, and Timothy Shea on charges that they defrauded donors to, quote-unquote, We the Build the Wall, a group that raised about $25 million to build a 3-mile stretch of wall along Texas border with Mexico. The Justice Department claims that the group of 4 built hundreds of thousands of dollars from donors to support the quote-unquote lavish lifestyle of Brian Koflich, who covertly took for his personal use more than $350,000 in funds, while Bannon received a little over $1 million, at least some of which he used to cover hundreds of thousands of dollars of personal expenses. All 4 of those charges face 1 count each of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering, each of which carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. Inspector in charge Philip R. Bartlett said the group that not only did they lie to donors, they schemed to hide their misappropriation of funds by creating sham invoices and accounts to launder donations to cover up their crimes, showing no regard for the law or truth. There are a few parts to this. I mean, for one, Koflich was getting paid monthly, even in these kind of covert shell companies. And they basically tried to hide this. They told the people that they were going to get 100% of the money to build the wall. And that, in fact, was not true. To make this that much more interesting, the Post Office, Postal Service, their officers was part of this particular arrest. So we're going to be talking about this a little bit more, but this was, they shot the wire pretty heavily yesterday. Fires in central and northern California have killed a handful of Californians and threatened tens of thousands of houses. California Governor Gavin Newsom addressed the wildfires in a short video recorded for the Democratic National Convention, telling viewers that if they, quote-unquote, are in denial about climate change, come to California. One of the most iconic images of the day was basically a sign with the fire raging behind it that had "must wear mask." Basically the greatest combination of COVID-19 and the fires. For the first time since the Great Depression, dual tropical storms are due to hit the United States at the same time on the same day. Tropical depressions 13 and 14 are due to hit this weekend through early next week, with each taking its own path through the Caribbean. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy has said he aims to make sweeping changes after the election, appearing before Congress today, and will have Chuck Zlatkin joining us on Monday to talk about all of this. Chuck Zlatkin was a gentleman that was here a few days ago, or last week if I'm not mistaken, talking about the Postal Service and the history of the attacks on the Postal Service, how the Democrats basically have allowed those attacks to take place without making the Postal Service whole, and even more so, how what's taking place now has been going on for years. So Chuck is going to be a great person to talk about this. Coronavirus may even be more contagious among kids in a study between the ages of 0 to 2. Doctors from Massachusetts General Hospital and Mass General Hospital for Children found that kids who tested positive displayed much higher levels of the virus in their airwaves than even adults, ICU coronavirus patients. Lal Yonker, director of the MGH Cystic Fibrosis Center and lead author of the study, said she was, quote unquote, not expecting the viral load to be so high. You think of a hospital and all of the precautions taken to treat severely ill adults, but the viral loads of these hospitalized patients are significantly lower than a healthy child who is walking around with high SARS-CoV-2 viral load. Those are your headlines. You're all caught up with the news. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So we're going to talk about the Steve Bannon thing a little bit later. But the wild part about the Steve Bannon issue was that when they basically arrested Steve Bannon, and it was a "We Build the Wall," and they initially tried to go through a GoFundMe with this, and apparently that was scuttled because they started getting a lot of heat and emphasis on, whoa, this looks, a little bit corrupt. And so GoFundMe was like, look, you need a charity to hold this money. Well, they basically had to either give people the option of to give their money back or rolling it over into a new project. The We Build the Wall. I thought about this and I said, and they were taking money from hundreds of thousands of people who, some of the letters, the people would say, look, I don't have a lot of money. I'm broke, but I believe in this. I believe in this. Here's my $2 or $10 or $20 or $1,000 or whatever. And they were able to raise millions, if I'm not mistaken, like $25 million. They start using this money for things that went beyond the wall. Now, keep in mind, 100% of the money was supposed to go towards the wall based on the advertisement and the things that they were saying. That was not true. Bannon was getting a piece of the money, and they were finding ways to send Koflich money each month, like thousands of dollars each month. And this is the way he was able to accumulate the $350,000, supposedly, out of the eye shot of the public. I've always said that Bannon was Trump's weapon. I said that, and I still believe that, because I think that the tone and the tenor that he set as a populist was something that was necessary to basically blow out his political opposition on the right, whether that was Hillary Clinton or whether that was Jeb Bush. And so the fact that he's arrested now, that's not good, especially not good for Trump. Whether or not Trump would have brought it back into orbit, whether or not Trump would have been listening to what Bannon was saying, whatever I think of Bannon as an individual, from a standpoint of political acumen, I actually think he's pretty sharp. And so the fact that he's getting arrested, he's being, put in this criminal case and all this other stuff, if he's guilty, yeah, he should be prosecuted. And it sounds like, at least based on the case that is being put forth, there were a lot of suckers out there that were very hateful that wanted to build a wall, even if it was their last dime to do so. I thought that was the saddest aspect of this. Honestly, there's a lot of right-wingers out there who's like, oh, those immigrants, got to keep them out of this country. Here's my $2. Poor as can be. Here's my $5. We got to build that wall. We got to keep them out there. I believe in what you're doing, sir. And now you find out that that money was used for taxes, for housing expenses, for, all of this money. Shane, what did you think about this? I read the story almost immediately, like 4 or 5 articles on it from the Washington Post, Business Insider, etc. Because I wanted to get, I kept thinking, all right, is this a political prosecution? Is this going after Bannon because they know Bannon is connected with Trump? But as you read it, no, it just seems like fraud.
Well, I mean, okay, so first of all, there are way more effective ways to protect the border or whatever, just to prevent immigrants or whatever you're wanting to do. Literally, there are way more effective ways to do it than building a physical wall. So you can just start right there. I'm actually taking consulting gigs. If anybody wants to pay me, I will happily help them build walls. Mainly because I'm planning on building fencing on my property to keep cattle and sheep in different areas. Anyway, now that was one long non sequitur after another. Start with the wall though. Trump actually pushed back on this. So Trump said that the border wall, that the private company that they were fundraising to have build this thing, the section of wall that private company built, this company, he's saying was actually built, literally, this is a quote, "It was only done to make me look bad." So that's with the Build a Wall project itself. That's with the company that did that.
He's like, "You're mocking me.
So
you're mocking my ability to build a wall."
Exactly. Well, no, and specifically, it was constructed by Fisher Industries of North Dakota, and reportedly it was defective. The actual portion of wall that they built wasn't actually effective. It started to crumble or something over time. So it's kind of, it's lunacy piled on lunacy. That's on the one hand. But here's the thing, Matt, is you were talking about Stephen Bannon. Everybody's kind of wondering, how will this affect Trump? Obviously, Bannon, as his former campaign chair, if you have Manafort gone after and prosecuted, and Bannon gone after and prosecuted, well, from either side, whether you're a Democrat who believes this doesn't work out for Trump, or whether you're a Republican who likes Trump, who thinks this is just another example of the witch hunt, in either way, we're going to be at loggerheads. Here's the problem, though, is that Trump disavowed Bannon years ago. So Trump strongly pushed Bannon away. Bannon left in mid-2017, of course, but then Trump strongly pushed him away at the beginning of 2018 after some comments came out from the book Fire and Fury. You may remember that whole row. But after that happened, I don't know. They haven't been in touch. You said that Bannon was Trump's weapon. I think that Bannon is probably somebody else's weapon. Even if he's his own weapon, I don't think he's Trump's weapon. I think he's.
Well, I think he was in 2016. I just think he was in 2016.
As his campaign head, you can definitely say he was Trump's guy. But that was then. This is now, and this also came after. This all came after that period. So what this is going to do is it's going to increase the reputation, the miasma of vague criminality that Trump seems to both genuinely have to some extent, and that has been built up around him by, as far as I can tell, a biased Justice Department, all these different ways going into this. I mean, starting before Trump was put into office with the Obama surveillance of the Trump campaign, all that stuff that was going down during the 2016 election. I mean, that just set us up for this whole. Anyway, that's kind of changing topics, but that's what I think about it tomorrow. We're going to be talking about.
Well, it is changing topics, but it does. Yeah, but. I mean, it's something that Peter Lavelle said, right? Who basically made the point that one of the worst aspects of Biden's speech was basically the fact that they did spy on his campaign. They were trying to take him out of office in sort of a soft coup. They investigated him to the hill. In fact, you are allowed to say you can investigate Trump ad infinitum as long as you want. The media would allow it. The moment that you bring up, wait a minute, what about this kind of, it did look like they spied on this campaign. And you have Ratcliffe, or even all of. Let me say it this way: if you had, let's say it was a Republican in office, and that Republican in office had a Justice Department that they put into effect, right? Loretta Lynch, or in this case, or Eric Holder, and that Justice Department is connected to the administration, and that administration that says basically, look, we're not going to put our thumb on the scale in regards to the investigation of Trump, or for the matter of even Clinton, and yet you find out they did. And then it's like when you find out that they did, that can't be investigated. That can't be talked about. Mainstream media, from their standpoint, only wants to talk about anything dealing with Trump. It's so biased. And they would just say, we're objective. And there's nothing to that. It's bizarre.
And here's another thing, is if you know that you're going, say that, like, I've done something terrible, I've done something horrible, like I've committed murder, and I know that there are people who are coming after me. If there's any way that I can plausibly, and if I want to maintain my innocence publicly, if there's any way that I can plausibly spin it that they committed the murder, then if I can make that happen, then I've done something pretty effective there. Then for one thing, I've just muddied the waters straight up. So at the beginning, my tail is in some sense covered, at least for a little bit. But then for another thing, it's not just that I've muddied the waters, it's that you set this sort of precedence in terms of how the story is viewed and how it gets reported. So moving back to the actual story for a second, moving back to what we were talking about with Russiagate, they did this stuff. Starting in 2016. It was, again, multiple centers of activity here. If you want to look at the DNC hack, that's probably the one that everybody knows most. There was also the Steele dossier that appears to have come out of Cody Scheer and a Clinton wing. The DNC hack, there are different takes on this. Bill Binney's take is that it was an inside job, that maybe Seth Rich, maybe somebody else exfiltrated the data. Then there are other takes that just, I don't know. I have kind of my own weird take. I'm agnostic about this stuff. Those are two of them. And then you also have the story that a lot of people forget about, which is Ukraine, the whole Ukraine DNC thing. A lot of people never learned about it in the first place. You have at least these three, and I'm sure that I'm forgetting others. There are different wings of this. I could bring in Browder, Natalia Veselnitskaya with the Trump Tower meeting, which became a sort of key plank of that. There are these different wings of activity. But my point here is all of this stuff was going on. But what the impeachment became, what they ultimately literally legally used to try to take Trump down, was the accusation that he had worked with Ukraine, that he was trying to work with Ukraine, that the association with Ukraine, instead of being with the Democrats, of course, was put on him. That was going into the election. The ultimate take, and in some sense, it's a little bit of evidence just in itself that they actually did the thing in a weird way, just because that was their move. They did the least effective possible impeachment, as far as I can tell. I don't know what else they would have stood it on, but the Ukraine thing, for most people, brought it out of nowhere. And I think, unfortunately, for what a lot of people, what it did is it put Ukraine in their minds right when the story about Biden was coming out, with Hunter Biden and his involvement there. I mean, it's a weird mess. We're going to come back to it. We're going to be talking about the situation with Steve Bannon being arrested, with Lee Stranahan, the former host of this show. We'll be back with him in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Hey, Lee.
Loud and clear with Brian Becker for the latest music.
Good. How?
We deal with real issues. War in the Middle East, the military-industrial complex, U.S.-Russian relations, the rise of China, austerity, mass migration, global warming, and social justice movements in the United States and around the world, and much more. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardroom of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for chance speak and are heard loud and clear, 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
Hi, and we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're joined by Lee Stranahan, host of Populist TV, has new episodes airing on Monday, and founder of Citizen Journalism School, which is about to be doing a drone giveaway, I hear. Anyway, Lee, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good. Yeah, great to have you. All right, we're talking about Bannon. Bannon was arrested today. First of all, you used to work with Breitbart. Obviously knew Bannon, and then I hear that a bunch of other former employees of Breitbart are not that disappointed to see Bannon being arrested. We've talked about We Built the Wall before. Am I right about that? What have you heard about this from other people?
Sure. Well, I used to be the lead investigative reporter at Breitbart News. I worked for Breitbart under Andrew Breitbart. Then after Andrew died and Bannon took over the company in the middle of the night, I continued to work for them, although I had to quit basically 3 times under Bannon. I never had problems under Andrew, but as you know, Shane, I had a lot of problems under Bannon. At first, in 2013, he did not want me to go to Beirut. And even though it wasn't going to cost the company a dime, he did not want that coverage. And that was the first sign, I think, that there was something weird going on with Bannon, because why would you care? It wasn't going to affect my work anyway. And I think the answer is Bannon did not want the truth about what was happening in Syria to get out in any way. And so I had to quit then. I had to quit a couple of other times, once when I was exposing Republican corruption. And the third time was back in 2017 when I was in the White House for Breitbart trying to ask questions about Ukraine. And you remember this period very well, Shane, because you were out here. And I was going to the White House trying to ask questions about Ukraine, which obviously was prescient. It wasn't hard to figure out, but it was prescient because no one else was talking about it till the impeachment. And again, they didn't want me in there. And I warned Steve Bannon. I have the emails, and I'll show them to any reporter who wants to look at them. I warned Steve Bannon repeatedly. I said, this Ukraine story is a big deal, and you need to focus on it, when he was in the White House as an advisor. So after Bannon was announced he was arrested yesterday, a number of Breitbart employees, I'm not going to name some of them, were, because I'll put it like this. The reason I won't name them is because they're still afraid of Bannon. Hannibal Lecter was still dangerous even in prison. Let's put it that way. So even Bannon in handcuffs, until he's locked away on an island somewhere, there are still people who are afraid of him because he's vengeful and he's vicious. And Larry O'Connor, who was a radio host, used to work under Andrew as well. These are all people who worked under Andrew, by the way, for the most part, under Andrew Breitbart. He said yesterday, I wouldn't, and Larry's a very nice guy. He's very politic. And he said, I wouldn't mind Steve Bannon seeing some discomfort in his life. Now that, from Larry, is vicious. And I feel the same way. Harsh. Yeah, it's politely vicious. So and so that's the background on that part. And then do you want me to talk about the We Build a Wall stuff?
Just to back you up, I mean, not only were you working on Ukraine at that point, but and this was, it was kind of hard to tell at the time what was sort of what and where the stories would go, and obviously still figuring a bunch of stuff out. But it was also CrowdStrike at that point. And that's was right. Specifically, I remember you were in the White House. You were trying to ask questions about CrowdStrike, and it became this problem with Breitbart. But you were also talking about the Chalupa sisters at the time, Alexandria Chalupa, talking about all of this stuff. Let's move to We Build the Wall for a second. So you had heard, as far as I can tell, that there were some problems with this, that it was a little bit shady. I don't know how much we can get into because I don't know who's willing to talk about it. We talked earlier this morning when we did the headlines about Dustin Stockton, who's been on the show before, who as far as I can tell, also thought there was some stuff shady with it going on, but still supported the project broadly. He was subpoenaed, will be appearing before a grand jury on this case, not arrested, nothing like that. But I think you had heard some of this stuff. What's your opinion? What have you heard about that project, about the group We Built the Wall, that of course is the center of this, the sort of financial fundraising vehicle that they are alleged, this group, including Bannon, is alleged to have defrauded the donors to this project. What have you heard about that project, Lee? Okay, so there were 4 people arrested yesterday. I've also read the indictment. I know fairly well two of those people are on my phone, which is Steve Bannon and Andy Bottolato. I think you know Andy too, right, Shane? Yeah, I don't think we've ever spoken on the phone, but I know, I definitely, totally. I've seen his email. Andy Bottolato, who was also indicted yesterday, is one of Steve's oldest friends. He goes back to their investment days. And when Steve Bannon was reported to be registered at a house he didn't live in Florida, that was Andy Bottolato's house. Now, when I say friends, Bannon's not a guy who I say has friends a lot, because he doesn't really. But Andy personally is friends with Steve and has been for some time. The other guy, Brian Kolfage, we've had on Fault Lines before. Brian is a disabled vet, and how he's been disabled is a matter of some question. But he's a disabled vet. He lost 3 limbs, and he had a coffee company, and we had him on to talk about that way back in the day on Fault Lines. Garland and I had Brian on, and Brian again presents himself very well. And so what happened was, We Build the Wall did not involve Bannon or his crew at all at first. Brian started this campaign, We Build the Wall. He put up a GoFundMe, and the GoFundMe suddenly raised like $3 million or $5 million or something. It eventually raised $20 million on GoFundMe before GoFundMe shut it down, and then it raised another $5 million after that. But as soon as they brought in a few million, suddenly Bannon started sniffing around. And like you say, Dustin Stockton, I consider Dustin and his partner Jennifer a friend. I consider them both friends. I like them both tremendously. And Dustin was involved with We Build a Wall very early. Then Bannon got involved. And Bannon got involved specifically when the money started flowing. And Dustin told me, I'm concerned about Bannon getting involved.
but I think he'll also bring a lot to the table in terms of his connections. They did a We Build the Wall symposium last year. Don Jr. was there, aside from people like Jack Posobiec and Mike Cernovich and Raheem Kassam and Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk and all these people who are kind of mini rock stars on the right. And so Dustin told me, he said, I'm concerned about Bannon being involved, but, you know, there's upsides too, so we'll see. Then, right before that symposium, I talked to Dustin. And by the way, Dustin yesterday was raided. SWAT type federal agents came from the DOJ and took their phones.
At his RV, right? Wasn't he like on vacation or on a tour or something with Jen?
Well, okay. So this actually ties into what I'm about to tell you. He's been in kind of hiding for a year. I talked to him last year about the symposium, and he said, dude, I'm not going anywhere near that. He's like, Bannon has completely taken over this organization. Jen and I are in an RV, and dude, I am like not just, the whole thing is freaky and weird. And you know that's the way Dustin talks. And he was really worried about it. He said, I said, I drove through there. He said, there's weird security everywhere. Bannon's connected with Eric Prince and Blackwater founder, and there's big security everywhere. And so Dustin said, this has gotten really weird. Bannon's completely taken over. So that gave me some hint of what was going on. And I'm not surprised that they figured out a way to funnel money to people like Brian Kolfage, part of the indictment here is that they said to people over and over again, this is an all-volunteer
100%.
organization. No one's getting paid.
Yeah.
Right? So they said that. I'm not surprised by two things. Number one, that they figured out a way through shell corporations to funnel money to Brian, and he got like $300,000. And I'm also not surprised that Bannon got $1 million. Well, that's
like
what
3
they're
times
saying.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. In other words, that's a typical Bannon move. He'll help you make $300,000 if he can make $1 million. And
okay, so one thing, this actually ties into something we've gone back and forth about on the show. It has to do with Bannon, just briefly on his geopolitics, his politics internationally, when it comes to other nations. He's a huge China hawk. He's the guy who got Bolton into the White House, as far as I can tell. Jamarl and I have kind of gone back and forth on this on the air. You said something about him being cautious about you going to Beirut, Lebanon, to talk about the early stages of the war in Syria, the rise of ISIS, that whole huge story, which you were early on. You said he was cautious about that. What can you just, in the last minutes, we don't have very long, can you give people a brief overview of Bannon's politics internationally, what he wants from America, what he doesn't want from other countries, who he's going up against, Hong Kong too, his support for Hong Kong independence and the protests, the dissidents there. What do you know about that, Lee?
His primary
and add one more part. Is he a hawk? That's the other part. Is he a
primary
hawk?
political motivation involves getting $1 million for Steve Bannon. That's what he was paid at Breitbart. He was paid $80,000 a month, more than any 3 reporters there combined. And he was in a year, more than any 3 reporters in a year, he was making in a month. And Bannon likes getting $1 million for things. So I'm not surprised. It just seems like a principle of his. I don't know what his principles are. He's talked to me, and he's talked publicly, personally, just privately, BSing with them. He doesn't like neocons, but he supports every neocon. So the other thing that's interesting about him, and just I know we're almost out of time, but that he's 2 things. He supports Nazis. He supports neo-Nazis. Jack Posobiec, who worked with the Nazi Clark brothers, is brought into the symposium by Bannon. Bannon himself said things. He was supportive of neo-Nazis, and he's a Zionist. But now those are both true, and they sound contradictory unless you just listen to Yaakov Shapiro, Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro has talked about how Zionism fits into promoting anti-Semitism. And then it all makes sense. Then you go, oh, I see. He's a neo-Nazi because that helps the Zionist. He promotes neo-Nazis because it helps the Zionist. And he supports the Zionists because they help him get large amounts of money. So he's worked with people like Nina Rosenwald from the Zionist Organization of America. He spoke at their events. It's not, when I say Zionist, I'm not throwing it around as a pejorative. That's really what I mean.
And just real quick, we've got to go. But Jamarl was asking, he's a hawk, right? You would consider Bannon.
Is he a hawk?
You were saying you don't know exactly his pure internal compass. Is he a hawk?
I don't know what he is.
How he presents?
Because he's personally said to me, not on the air, sitting around talking, that he doesn't like neocons. He's also said it publicly. Yet, you're right, he's the guy who brought Bolton in. So you tell me, he's an enigma wrapped in a mystery, wrapped in a check for $1 million.
All right, that was the voice of Lee Stranahan. All right, thank you for joining us. Lee, host of Populist TV, new episodes airing there Monday, and the founder of Citizen Journalism School, which, by the way, is about to be doing a drone giveaway, apparently. And we'll be back in a minute. You've been listening to Bannon, info on Bannon, on Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host, Shane Stranahan. We have a great guest for you today to talk about, again, the convention speech. Last night was the last night. Joe Biden gave his speech of his life, as I'm being told. Contributor to the Black Agenda Report and co-author of American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News. We have with us Danny Haifong. Danny, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back, guys.
No, man, of course. So, as I said, Joe Biden has given the speech of his life, apparently. Let me ask you this. A country that, one of the things that I think seems to be, let's say, in all of these speeches, whether you're talking about Trump, whether you're talking about Harris, whether you're talking about Biden, all of them, is almost this kind of narrative of America. And it's a narrative of America that is basically done in a way that is not entirely accurate, or at the very least is done for manipulative reasons to give people these notes and feelings and tones. So when you leave the speech, no, there wasn't any policy there, but you have a feeling about it. To you, from your perspective of the world and everything else, I personally thought the speech was offensive, especially in contrast to what the American public is suffering and experiencing right now, many of which were people that Joe Biden is now screaming to give him the votes. How do you process the speech? And what do you think the speech means for Biden administration, if you can even decipher that from the speech?
The entire 4 months plus that this pandemic has been ravaging the United States, Biden has been really nowhere to be seen and hasn't really said anything in the way of concrete policy that could have been done and that should have been done and should have been called for by the entire Democratic Party from the very beginning, both in the realm of economic relief as well as the realm of protecting human lives. Joe Biden's speech is really just another example of how prepared and organized the Democratic Party is to try to con its own base into staying with the two-party duopoly. And also this strategy, it's very indicative of the strategy of trying to court Republicans and the intelligence agencies. We heard many dog whistles in the speech to how Joe Biden wouldn't support dictators, would stand up to countries like Russia and China, and would be more American than Donald Trump in every single aspect of policy, including the economy. Joe Biden really isn't that different from Trump in terms of the overall messaging that it's time to, quote unquote, build back better. But at the end of the day, for me, all of the American exceptionalist tropes, all of the false promises, really just to get back to normal, which I think the pandemic and this Great Depression that we're in shows that just normal is not good enough anymore. All of that is just an attempt to avoid some of the actual policy prescriptions that are needed to really transcend this moment and to really come out of it in a condition that allows for the actual protection of people's lives and the actual deliverance of people's needs. And I think that is what we're missing entirely in the whole DNC charade, but especially Joe Biden, who, regardless of what Donald Trump says about him being a radical leftist, Joe Biden is the pinnacle of what the establishment is. He is a right-wing politician. He is a war hawk. He is a racist. He is all of the things that Donald Trump is in many respects. And he is supposed to be more effective at it. I don't really see that. I think that Joe Biden gave a better speech than he normally gives. But of course, with months of preparation, hiding out, and not really being active, he should not get a pat on the back for that. But of course, with this
well,
desire,
Danny, there's one thing though. That was strategy. If I'm not, I would make the argument that Biden doing that is a strategy, and whether you like it or dislike it, if the only thing you cared about, let's say for the moment, you didn't see the presidency as policy, you didn't see it as doing X or Y for the population, you didn't see it as ameliorating concerns and dealing with the hardships, especially in the context of a pandemic or these other crises. If you looked at it purely through the level of gamesmanship of only thing I care about is getting elected. And if you are Joe Biden and you say, look, I do worse the more people see me, so I'm not going to be there. I'm going to be the invisible man. Despite the fact that I have all these crises, I'm not going to make an affirmative case for the office. I know that the majority of the people who are backing me are doing so entirely to get rid of Trump. And so when I make my speech, I'm going to speak in terms of I am going to be Joe Biden. I'm not going to be Trump. And when I run for office, I am going to say balance the position. And what I mean by balance the position is keep the level of inequity that's in the position currently. So anything that I do that's in the affirmative may actually draw attention to me. It may even create a situation where I gaffe and they focus on me. Nope. I want all the attention to be basically on Trump. I would come out every so often. I would give this kind of speech. I would do all of those basic things. I will choose Kamala Harris because Kamala Harris was a cop. And Donald Trump kept saying that Joe Biden, wanted to defund the police. Joe Biden, wanted to get rid of the police. So I will make a tactical choice. This person is black to a point. And I can sell her as such. I could have Kingmaker Clyburn get out there and say, hey, he is not taking advantage of the African-American community. Look at this black woman that he's putting forward. And Joe Biden also knows that she's a cop. So the argument that I'm soft on crime is somewhat belabored by the fact that you can find videos of me saying, why doesn't Reagan execute more people, and choosing this top cop? And if you're going to say that, I'm the radical left, I am also going to trot out a bunch of Republicans on stage to buffer it. Meaning his approach to this seems to be balance. Donald Trump has to deal with all of these problems. Donald Trump is drowning in dealing with all of these problems. Why am I going to add myself to it? And that's a maddening perspective, but I think it's what's taking place because it doesn't deal with any of the issues. Meaning policy doesn't matter. I'm just going to maintain the balance in the position that keeps Trump drowning. What do you think about that? Do you think that that has legs in regards to an analysis of what it seems like Joe Biden is trying to do as he basically sleepwalk his way into the White House without actually offering anything to a country that is in peril?
Yes, and I would also say that the entire Democratic Party has been doing that. When we just look at how the Democratic Party has conducted itself, it hasn't put up a real fight. It hasn't put up a real protest as to just the deplorable conditions that face workers here in the United States, that face the majority of its own base, what it's done, it is completely deflected onto the Republican Party all of the blame for all of the suffering that people are facing right now. And so Joe Biden, in a lot of respects, has to hide. He has to maintain this persona of being the person who isn't Trump and nothing more, because whenever there is an investigation into his record, people ultimately find him an unattractive candidate. And I think that this is sort of Hillary Clinton 2.0, with the caveat that Joe Biden is not as an effective candidate as even Hillary Clinton. And I think the Democratic Party has known this. We've heard Barack Obama himself mumble in the background many times that Joe Biden could screw this up, that Joe Biden may not be able to get the job done. But in the end, it's the corporate donors who make the decisions, and it is them who want the most effective candidate and the most effective ticket to serve their interests. And that's exactly what Kamala Harris is. I mean, Kamala Harris doesn't really offer anything electorally except for the fact that she can hopefully maintain the black vote to a point where at least Joe Biden doesn't drop off in that respect. But at the end of the day, really, the entire Democratic Party strategy at this point is to service its donors and to try to become the most effective bipartisan party that exists in the White House. And that's why there's so much currying favor of Republican voters. That's why there's so much bullying of progressive voters, because ultimately the Democratic Party knows, and Joe Biden knows, that people who want Medicare for all, people who want peace, people who want real economic relief, real material improvement, they aren't really for the Democratic Party.
Just to interrupt, I'm sorry, Danny. People who allow themselves to be bullied. We're not talking about, the 300-pound guy that punches you in the face and says, give me your $1. We're talking about grown adults who basically allows themselves to be talked down to and wagged a finger at in order to basically back a candidate that is dramatically unattractive. I don't accept, at the very least I'm tired of accepting, this premise that lefties, they're forced into this. They're not. They choose. I mean, this has been 40 years. Don't misunderstand me. I get the scam, right? I'm going to put this horrible person up, and I'm going to make this person a monster and say that this election is the only thing that matters in the history of reality. And then I'm going to put up my guy who, is milquetoast. He's not going to give you anything, but at the very least, he's not this monster. And then they would say, hey, you have to vote for the Democrat, whether you're a Democrat or not. Meaning all of Jill Stein's voters, for whatever reason, in a completely different party, should have voted for this random Democrat. And that because this guy's not a monster as they're framed, then you should vote for this other guy who gives you nothing of what you want from a policy space. And lefties take this. It's been like 40 years. And so I don't like, maybe I don't like the characterization of bullying, and maybe it is true in some sense, but it's accepted. The fact that a grown adult is going to sit there and be talked down to by this other group that gives you nothing of what you want in the political space, for some reason bothers me. How do people get out of that finger trap? Right? Like, because I get it, it's like you feel like you're stuck with this guy because you don't want what you consider in your head to be worse. And you miss the point that the momentum of all this stuff moves further and further and further to the right, to the point where all of these Republicans can dance on stage perfectly at home in the Democratic Party. That should give lefties pause. How do lefties extricate themselves from this situation, as opposed to taking and accepting the position of being bullied?
Well, I think it's really about how we view and how we understand change as occurring, especially change that benefits working people and oppressed people. And the only time that such change has occurred in the United States and around the world is when people who are facing the problems that this system really does press upon them is to make society ungovernable and to build social movements that are strong enough to be a force in the making of history. And at this time, with the absence of that, all that we have is this image of the Democratic Party as this mythical institution that, at the very least, will supposedly protect the very few things that are left on the table for working people to protect. But every time that the con game of supporting the Democratic Party has participated in, we see that those things become more and more remote, taken away from us both by Republicans and Democrats. And so at the end of the day, I think it's about rejecting people like Ava DuVernay and others who say that people are dying right now. The Trump administration is so monstrous. You need to vote Democrat regardless of your principles. That has to be ignored. And unfortunately, too many people, and we see this also in the Sanders section of the Democratic Party, are willing to kind of bow down, step out, suppress their own demands in this hope that they can build a stronger base within the Biden camp. We see it with the Sunrise Movement. We see it in so many of the organizations affiliated with Sanders. That strategy has to be thrown out the window because
we'll be back. That's the voice of Danny Haifong, contributor to the Black Agenda Report and co-author of American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News. We're going into a break. We will be back with him in just a minute, though. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Friday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a weekly segment of the worst mainstream media headlines of the week. They tell us what's behind the worst, most misleading, and funniest headlines from around the news with Steve Patt of the blog Left Eye on the News. Together, they pull apart the corporate media's bias, spin, and downright lies. Tune in this Friday and every Friday for the worst and most misleading headlines of the week.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Haifong. We're joined by Danny Haifong in this segment, continuing our conversation. In the last, Danny is a contributor to the Black Agenda Report and the co-author of American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News. By the way, real quick, for those listening, you can follow Danny on Twitter at Spirit of Ho, SPIRITOFHO, Spirit of Ho. Guessing, Danny, just real quick, that's referring to Ho Chi Minh, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And then, you can also, Black Agenda Report, you can read his work, Danny's work, at blackagendareport.com. Danny, thank you for being with us. We're talking about the DNC and Biden as sort of inseparable in the last segment. And we're talking about, specifically, basically what we talked about was how the DNC, how the Democrats have put up Biden as a sort of non-figure, a non-candidate, an inert candidate, like a wall to keep Trump at bay. And that's where we are in this election. Assuming I've characterized that correctly, Danny, where does that leave us with the DNC in general? You're talking about maybe progressives getting bullied, or the true left wing on the left getting bullied by the Democratic establishment. Jamarl and I have been talking about the idea that we might be near an exciting moment where it's sort of at the moment of its greatest brittleness or its weakest moment, that you might have something approaching an opportunity. That's like the moment to strike if you're wanting to do a reform of the DNC, if you're wanting to sort of take the party over anew, break up the monolith. It seems like we're close to that. What is your take on that? Do you think we need that? Do you think that's possible? Do you think it's myopic to think we're close as we are? Or as close as I'm saying we are? What is your take on that, Danny?
Well, we're definitely at a crisis period in the United States as a whole. The system of American capitalism and imperialism is facing a huge crisis of legitimacy that cannot be overturned by the Democratic Party. And so it is important for masses of people to learn that, to understand that the Democratic Party cannot ameliorate the suffering of humanity. And I do not believe that the DNC can necessarily be taken over. But what I do believe is that the legitimacy of the DNC and the Democratic Party can be further eroded and can leave opportunities for more people to separate themselves from this institution and to build something new. I think that's really what we need. We need a new party, not necessarily a political party, but we need a party of the people that will spearhead its interests, will fight for its interests, and will address the pressing problems like endless war, racism, austerity, and the mass incarceration state in a way that can bring together a huge section of the exploited and oppressed classes to do that. So I do think that this is still an opportunity. However, in this period where it seems like the DNC is right now the only option that people face, I think the election itself, all the way up until November, will be a struggle, more so over whether you want someone like Donald Trump, the chaos, et cetera, versus whether you want someone like Joe Biden who will bring us back to normal. And I don't think that really leaves any room for left politics.
I mean, here's one way of looking at it. If you're in the hold your nose camp, so if you're voting for Biden, you're either in the hold your nose camp or you're in some sort of genuine approval where, Bidenism, we've had Ted Rowell on the show before, just giving his definition of, I think his term, Bidenism, at least at first in his incarnation of it, which is this idea of it's you have Trumpism, and then Bidenism is the antidote to Trumpism, which has, like you're saying, it has no real policy agenda, nothing explicit of its own. It's just a response to Trump. So you have some people who might like Biden for himself. You have some people who are holding their nose and voting for him. And then, of course, you have some Democrats and plenty of non-Democrats who aren't going to be voting for him. For the people who aren't planning on voting for him, you're right. For the other people, the conversation between now and November and after that is going to be dominated by the election and its immediate aftermath. But for the other people who aren't planning on voting for Biden anyway, I think now is the time is riper. It's only getting riper, but you want to start picking the fruit. Now is a good opportunity to start looking at how the hell you can change the Democratic Party, on the DNC, on a deep level. I mean, hell, the American system, while we're at it, the American political system, you can look at the Electoral College, all these other things, but that's not what we're talking about. With the DNC specifically, it seems at a moment of critical historical weakness. Again, the Democrats have painted Trump as their worst opponent, the worst American president ever, literally, I think, bar none. That's been their argument. And now they're putting up against him their worst candidate ever. So just in terms of, like, you get these litmus tests sometimes of where our institutions are at in terms of how effectively they respond to things. I mean, America and COVID is a good international example of that. But with the Democrats and Biden and Trump in 2020, after 2016, it shows they can't do what they're supposed to do. It shows that they're weak. I just think now the time is riper than ever. Anyway, I don't mean to beat a dead horse. Partly it's just I'm looking at it sort of from the outside, and I'm a little bit dumbfounded that I don't see more action. It seems like there's so much potential there. There's so much built up kinetic potential for the system to break down, for people to remake it.
Definitely. I think what needs to happen now is that the ideological divisions over how to challenge the Democratic Party need to be worked out, because there are a significant number of people who may want something like Medicare for all or a Green New Deal, but on the question of how do you get there, that is something that I think divides the so-called progressive section of the U.S. population. And so those ideological divisions need to be worked out if there is going to be a challenge to someone like Joe Biden. And I think the big task ahead is to ensure that people who are wanting something more than Joe Biden aren't allowed to basically stand down when the pressure, and that pressure is going to be very deep, comes from the DNC that says, well, you didn't vote for Joe Biden, you didn't support him all out, so that means that it's your fault that Donald Trump is in the White House, when Donald Trump could win the White House on the sheer fact that Joe Biden cannot inspire enough people to come out, and then the machinery of the Electoral College and all the myriad of ways that the election system in general is completely rigged from the beginning, just work its magic to help someone like Donald Trump, who also is an incumbent and who, by that fact alone, has a greater chance than I think many people think. So I think that's the real task ahead, is to ensure that people who are seeing this system as illegitimate are not allowed to be sort of taken into that wholly reactionary narrative of stay in your place because it will be your fault that we have this, as you said, worst president in modern American history, which, as Margaret Kimberly, my colleague, says is ridiculous in the case of just looking at how U.S. presidents have treated, for example, Black people.
Let me ask you this, Danny. I agree with you on this. What happens if Biden loses this? Because you're right. People are making it, look, all things being equal, if nothing happens between now and election day, it's just a coasting situation where COVID still goes, you still have the protests, you still have the economic disruption to the country. Those things don't necessarily go anywhere. Biden, for the most part, doesn't give an affirmative. He just kind of stands in the background and let Trump drowns. And Trump still wins. I mean, because it's still possible. Like you say, he's an incumbent. He's a president. The majority of the people in the country, when polled, believe Trump will win, despite the fact they may be voting for Biden. And regardless of how the polling is, well, the polling was pretty bad for Clinton also. What if Biden loses? What happens? There's already a civil war, you can say, in the Democratic Party. How do those lines get that much more fractious? And what do you think happens, either A, in a Trump administration, and B, from the standpoint of the Democratic Party as they try to reconcile that loss?
Yes. Well, I think both sides will be trying to firm up their legitimacy because the Democratic Party will have lost a lot by losing to Trump for a second time. So I think the Democratic Party will actually double down on its consensus of endless war and austerity and will do exactly what it has been doing, which is to try to rectify and revive a lot of the neocon and neoliberal forces that it has put under its big tent. While the Trump administration, I think, will continue on this path of waging a new Cold War against China and will continue it without any real reason not to peddle the lies that it has made things better for the people of the United States in so many respects, whether it's the pandemic response, whether it's foreign policy, et cetera. I think we'll see a doubling down of the most reactionary elements of society. And so it will really be up to us to challenge that in a moment where I think the U.S. could be very vulnerable, given that the economic situation will not improve very rapidly. And also the pandemic, as you said, will be something we're dealing with in the height of respiratory season here in the United States. So I think that that's what we have to look forward to, and it's not much. So I think that should be really the lesson, is that we don't have anything to look forward to whether Trump or Biden wins, and that should tell us that something new is needed and that we need to really detach ourselves from this duopoly.
I'm curious, from this, we only have like maybe 30 seconds or a minute left before we have to go into a break. But is that really a party? Now, what I mean by that is parties have a tendency to alienate as opposed to policy. When the civil rights movement was moving forward, they had a policy, but basically it was somewhat of an idea of, look, this is what we want. We're fanatic for this because we are infinitely right that the way the system and the way this world is working is fundamentally immoral. Now, that's strong. And that's, he annoyed Democrats, he annoyed Republicans, because ultimately what he wanted was this very specific thing. This is what I'm here for. I'm willing to die on the flag in order to get this thing through. And King, whatever people want to say about him at the time, because at the time he annoyed people, now he's looked at as an icon, he was able to get that stuff through. And yeah, at times he started to work with the Democratic Party on the policy and everything else, but primary was, this is what we want. It was the demand. And it seems like the left doesn't have that. It doesn't seem like there's, like, for example, Medicare for All. Medicare for All has 88% Democratic support, and the party still tells you to kick rocks. You know what I mean? So what does that look like? And is that really a party? Or is that starting with this kind of primary demand of a specific thing of, this is what we want, and we're willing to die on the flag for it? Let's go about 30 seconds. And this is from the standpoint of lefties who are pushing for a particular topic. Or is it, no, we just need a whole other party in order to make this work and push this through?
Well, I think it really is about building a mass movement first. I don't believe that a political party will be a panacea because the electoral system is designed to leave out progressivism and leave out the left. So it's about building a mass movement armed with demands that have to be met or else. And I think that's really the only way to approach politics at this time of crisis.
You've been listening to Danny Haifeng, contributor to Black Agenda Report and co-author of American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News. Danny, thank you for joining us, man. This was a great conversation. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back. We are live, coming to you from across the divided states of America. On the West Coast and in the politically independent corner, I am investigative political analyst and radio show host Shane Stranahan.
And on the East Coast and in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, the last man on the wall with my co-host all the way on the West Coast, Jamarl Thomas. Oh, Shane Stranahan. I am Jamarl Thomas. I was trying to ad-lib there, Shane, to kind of screw that up. So I'm sorry.
You know, I've learned the hard way. You've got to think this stuff out at least seconds in advance. Ad-libbing is never the way to go. You usually end up stumbling over yourself, as I am right now. I've got to say, though, Jamarl, your poetic imagery bringing us in, a burning ember in the darkness. I don't know. It's 6 a.m. where I am, and it just puts me in an interesting sort of mystical mindset. With that, though, you heard our intros, Shane Stranahan, Jamarl Thomas. Together, we constitute the vibrant entity that is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Vibrant entity. How did you like that, Jamarl? All right,
I love that one. I love the imagery of that stuff,
good.
Right? A burning ember in the darkness. What does that look like? A comet in the blackness of night. And, you have that stuff in your head,
exactly.
Especially if you're like us, who gets enamored by the sci-fi stuff or the esotericness of it. Yeah, it's pretty heady.
The lone torch raised above the valley floor. I mean, yeah, man, it's just beautiful. It's a kind of cool thing. I get you. It's intense. It's visceral. All right. We've got headlines. Every morning at 7, 8, and 9 a.m. Eastern, we give out headlines anywhere between half a dozen and a dozen usually. And I'll get straight into them. President at last night's final night of the Democratic National Convention. He gave a widely approved speech. That's what I'm going to call it. Although, of course, we've been ragging on it for this whole show. Neither Jamarl nor I are particular fans of Joe Biden's. But again, the media is giving it plaudits. Fox News, even on its homepage, last I checked, Chris Wallace saying that Trump blew holes in, that Biden blew holes in Trump, specifically saying that Biden was sort of replacing Trump's caricature with an actual candidate, where Trump has been painting him as an increasingly, the word that I want to use, I'll just use it, an increasingly demented person. But that's obviously a pejorative, but that effectively is how Trump's been painting him. But he seemed okay last night. He seemed decent, at least. For all of us who've been seeing these gaffes coming out like clockwork for a while there, he did decent compared to that stuff. Anyway, next big headline. That wraps up the convention. Next week, the RNC, the Republican National Convention, begins. Next big headline, though. Also in the Republican sphere, one-time Trump campaign head Stephen K. Bannon has been arrested, along with 3 others, on charges of fraud. We're talking about this with Lee Stranahan in the last hour at 8:15 Eastern. It's 5:15 Pacific. Go back and check that out. We were talking about, again, Bannon being arrested. Southern District of New York indicted him, along with Brian Kolfage, Andrew Badalato, and Timothy Shea, on charges that they defrauded donors to We Build the Wall. That's a group that raised about $25 million to build a 3-mile stretch of wall along Texas's border with Mexico. The Justice Department claims that the group of 4 built hundreds of thousands of dollars from donors to support the, quote, lavish lifestyle, end quote, of Brian Kolfage, who, quote, covertly took for his personal use more than $350,000 in funds, end quote, while Bannon, according to the Justice Department, received over $1 million, at least some of which he used to cover hundreds of thousands of dollars of personal expenses. You get hundreds of thousands of dollars floating around there. As Lee said in the last hour, it's interesting to note that Bannon, who Lee said swept in sort of like a hawk at the first sight of a lot of money. It's interesting to note that Bannon took home about apparently 3 times as much as Kolfage, who, from what Lee was saying, was the one who started the project. So it would make sense that with that public platform comes some of that heft. But anyway, all 4 of those charged, facing 1 count each of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and another count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. Each of those, by the way, each of those charges would carry a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. Inspector in charge Philip R. Bartlett said of the group that, quote, not only did they lie to donors, they schemed to hide their misappropriation of funds by creating sham invoices and accounts to launder donations and cover up their crimes, showing no regard for the law or the truth. He continued, this case should serve as a warning to other fraudsters that no one is above the law, not even a disabled war veteran, that's Brian Kolfage, or a millionaire political strategist, that's Stephen K. Bannon right there. Bannon was reportedly arrested while on board a $28 million yacht stationed off the coast of Connecticut. That yacht, by the way, was owned by one Guo Wengui, an exiled Chinese billionaire and a close associate of Bannon's, with whom Bannon was supposed to, sorry, having a brain fart here for a second, with whom Bannon was in talks earlier this year, just a couple of months ago, to create sort of like an alternative political revolutionary party in China. Anyway, Bannon's known as a hawk on this stuff, or at least that's what we're sort of confirming, although, like Lee said, he's an enigma wrapped in a mystery, wrapped in a $1 million check, which is apparently what it takes to buy his allegiance. Quick note here, full disclosure, we have actually had 2 guests on this show who were involved in this. I wasn't even aware of the main one, who's Brian Kolfage, the guy apparently at the center of this stuff.
He's been on the show? No way.
He's been on this show. That's the thing. I look back, he was way before I was a producer or anything like that. I wasn't involved when he was on, but yeah, he was on a few times. And yeah, wow. triple amputee. That's actually part of the thing that's not getting publicized, but it's what the inspector in charge mentions in the headline there, is that it should serve as a warning. Not even a disabled war veteran, remains immune to the long arm of the law. Anyway, the other guests, we've had Brian Kolfage on the show. Controversial stuff indeed. We've also had Dustin Stockton on the show. I haven't mentioned so far in these headlines. He and his partner Jen Lawrence were actually subpoenaed yesterday at around 7 a.m. or something like that. Subpoenaed. They will be appearing before a grand jury in relation to We Build the Wall. So yeah, we have, this show has a weird connection to this huge national story. We tend to work like that, mainly through Lee coming in with some of these things. Or Lee was being pursued by Congress. Anyway, there's some weird history there just with the Russiagate stuff and associated figures. In our next headline, fires in Central and Northern California have killed a handful of Californians and threatened tens of thousands of houses. California Governor Gavin Newsom addressed those wildfires in a short video that was recorded for the Democratic National Convention. He told viewers that if they, quote, are in denial about climate change, come to California, end quote. And I can tell you, I'm here right now. It's a bit smoky outside. Every day or two, the smoke comes and goes. We're in Southern California, so it's a bit further away from the real hot spots where these fires are going off. But yeah, it's exciting. And I will actually going up on a short trip, taking a short trip up to Central California in a week near where these fires are going on. We've been rethinking. Anyway, it's headlines. We can maybe come back to that at some point. Not sure it's the most newsly or timely thing we could be talking about. In our next headline, for the first time since the Great Depression, dual tropical systems are due to hit the U.S. at the same time, on the same day. Tropical depressions 13 and 14 are due to hit this weekend through early next week. Each will be taking its own path through the Caribbean. One will be heading more towards the Gulf of Mexico, through the Gulf of Mexico towards the Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana, that area. The other will be heading through the Eastern Caribbean and up along the coast by the Florida Panhandle, up along the East Coast. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy will be appearing before Congress today. This comes over recent scrutiny in the last couple of weeks. A lot of pressure. He apparently has been slowing things down, been slowing deliveries down, trying to reduce overtime pay, responding to what he calls a sort of bloated USPS system. He said he aims to reform after the election. He's saying he wants to make sweeping changes after the election. Of course, we've had Chuck Zlatkin. We'll be having him on again Monday to tell us what he thinks about what Joy is going to be saying today. The union, which Chuck represents, the Postal Workers Union, they see this as a long attempt to privatize the USPS. Jamarl and I have talked about this before. Anyway, Louis DeJoy will be appearing before Congress today, and we'll have Chuck Zlatkin on Monday. Check that out then. In our next headline, coronavirus may be even more contagious among kids. In a study of children ages 0 to 22, doctors from Massachusetts General Hospital and Mass General Hospital for Children found that kids who tested positive displayed much higher levels of the virus in their airways than even adult ICU coronavirus patients. Lael Yonker, director of the MGH Cystic Fibrosis Center and lead author of the study, said she was not expecting the viral load to be this high. And I quote here, "You think of a hospital and of all of the precautions taken to treat severely ill adults, but the viral loads of these hospitalized patients are significantly lower than a quote-unquote healthy child who is walking around with a high SARS-CoV-2 viral load." That was all from Lael Yonker. And with that, you are all caught up. We've covered it. We've covered Bannon, Democratic National Convention, extreme weather, and coronavirus spread among kids. Oh, and Louis DeJoy. That's the news. Those are the headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So, Jamarl, we're talking. We're also taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number we're taking calls at. I believe that we're going to be having Wyatt on. Is that's still happening, right? Wyatt's coming on in about 5 minutes, talking with us about Black Lives Matter, DC, Muriel Bowser, right?
Excellent. That should be good. Wyatt is a good guy on that stuff.
Should be.
Yeah, he's a good guy on that stuff.
While I was giving, for those listening, there was some weird uncertainty about that. While I was giving the headlines, I saw we have a back chat thing going on. I saw something that I thought was like about Wyatt and about how he might not be coming on. But as far as I can tell, he's due to come on. I was just sort of double checking. But anyway, okay. Wyatt's coming on. That'll be good. We do have a caller on the line. I gave out our number. We should go to this call before we run out of time. BJ from Florida. BJ, you're on the line. What's going on?
How's it going? Oh, nothing much. Just the whole Joe Biden thing is just, and it's hilarious. The Democratic Party in general, the problem that I have with them is that they're fully cognizant of what they're doing, and they do everything in order to satisfy agendas that don't cater to the interests of the proletariat. And if you look at Trump's behavior, him saying, oh, he said this about the Central Park Five, or he says these outrageous things. If he's taught that, and he genuinely believes that, I really don't have an issue with that. I don't have an issue with people that are racist in general for the most part. What I have an issue with is people who know racism is bad, and they will manufacture ideas and ideologies in people, and then they will polarize those ideas to create rifts among people, and then utilize them for their interests. And the people that are being used don't even benefit. The whole concept of it is just, it's stupid to me, because if you took and separated all races, there would still be division. It'd be because of age, sexual preferences, some sort of idea, as we see with our, very polarized democracy. Anything, you could take that, but a manipulative, evil person will take that and they will put a microscope on it. Like you could take something simple and innocuous, like, hey, okay, boomer, and while it's funny now, if there wasn't race as a factor or religion, someone would put a microscope on it, divide people, and say those young people are the problem. It's us. We're the good ones. We're the good guys. Now give me money so I can, create these systems, erect these systems around you that are going to hurt you and line my pockets up. It's about power. I don't want to take up too much time. I love your show. You guys are both freaking awesome. Keep it up.
Hey, thank you so much. Great call. I appreciate the call. I mean, so a couple of quick responses here. You brought up one of the first things you brought up, and what Jamarl very quickly responded to, was how they're not representing the interest of the proletariat. I think a lot of what we're seeing, and it's interesting to see the boomerang thing happening here, is you have a generation of Democrats who don't really fit with traditional sort of leftist politics. They've moved away. I don't know exactly when that started. I mean, maybe 90, maybe Carter. I don't know. I mean, I'm not the expert on this stuff. We've had people who dated it earlier, I think, than that. But then there's this question of whether that they should. What's interesting is it's interesting to see people coming back. It's interesting to see younger people right now moving back to the left, moving back towards socialism, speaking in terms of the proletariat. I don't know. As somebody who's outside of that stuff, I don't have a real stake in that. It's just interesting to note that happening. But yeah, the Democratic Party definitely does not seem to represent those views, and by extension, they're not representing sort of way of seeing things, the way of solving problems. I'll put it bluntly, as far as I can tell, more sort of national state capacity in terms of directing the economy and taking over key sectors of the economy. So you're right. They're not representing those interests. I just think it's part of this longer sort of generational shift away from it. And the point I'm making is it's interesting to see it coming back. I'm curious if that's going to bear fruit. And that's why I'm saying if you guys want something, just as an independent political, not necessarily advocate, but somebody who gives advice, I would recommend pushing for it now. The time is ripe. If you want to make changes, and same thing for people on the right who see ways that the RNC isn't representing their interest or what they think is best for America. I mean, you can push for it. Things are a little bit. I think there's room. I think there's room for things to grow and change right now. That seems to be the space. If you're confident, what's your take on that in our last couple of seconds before we go to break tomorrow?
Well, we got to go to break. Let's wrap. Let's wrap, and we'll be back with Wyatt. I mean, look, I agree with you. It doesn't represent our interests. I mean, I gave the whole basic thing prior that I showed all of these ideas that the public itself accepts, it wants, and they say no. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. So where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Yeah, we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Reed. We're joined by Wyatt Reed for this segment Wyatt Reed, Sputnik News analyst and producer for By Any Means Necessary, which airs on Radio Sputnik Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Wyatt, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How about yourselves?
Good. Doing well this morning. All right. Wanted to talk about Black Lives Matter in D.C. real quick. Last time we had you on, you were in Portland. I hear you've come back. Are you back in D.C. at this point?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm back here in D.C. now. I am. I've been here for a few weeks now, and I've been covering the protests here. The ongoing sort of Black Lives Matter protests.
All right. And so what we brought you on to talk about, we heard Muriel Bowser gave a speech at the Democratic National Convention, and she's getting some pushback, not only locally, I hear, but also nationally, but definitely locally from Black Lives Matter activists. Again, Muriel Bowser, mayor of D.C. What are local activists saying? Wyatt?
Well, that's right. This entire Democratic National Convention has featured a number of speeches by mayors like DC's Muriel Bowser. This was a couple of nights ago, a couple choice quotes were basically lamenting how the entire sort of militarized response to this ongoing movement against police terror is basically, all the fault of Donald Trump. That's sort of the message that we got from her speech just a couple nights ago. She said he sent troops in camouflage into our streets. He sent tear gas into the air and federal helicopters too. I knew if he did this to D.C., he would do it to your city or your town. And this was shortly before she was actually used by the Democrats to introduce the family of George Floyd, the black man whose police murder kickstarted this massive ongoing movement, whose effects we continue to see day to day. Now, Black Lives Matter DC had some pretty strong words about this. I think, unsurprisingly, they said Mayor Bowser has proven over and over again that she supports, she knows about, and sanctions the violent way that police crack down on protesters. This is April Goggins with Black Lives Matter DC, and a friend of the show and a longtime local organizer against police violence and against police terror. She said the fact that Mayor Bowser is introducing George Floyd's family is disgusting. And that's where we should be talking. She did it on purpose, overlooking Black Lives Matter Plaza. All these things are made to actually distract, make other people who don't earn the right of talking about Black Lives Matter look like they're leading it. This is something we see again and again with the Democrats, with a number of the mayors who they're sort of putting front and center in what I and, obviously a lot of local organizers view as a pretty clear attempt to sort of co-opt this popular energy, this popular support, and take it, and essentially see that energy and that support, that solidarity, attempt to capitalize and essentially steal it from the same protesters who they've been brutalizing for so long. This really, I think one of the reasons this cuts so deep is that it's been less than a week since Mayor Bowser's Metropolitan Police Department kettled and arrested, so essentially entrapped and arrested over 40 activists, journalists, legal observers over at 18th and S Street. This is like, we're not discussing ancient history. This didn't happen months and months ago. Certainly wasn't years ago. This was last week when her police rounded up dozens and dozens of people and subjected them to indiscriminate collective punishment, locked them all up for charges that they clearly knew that they couldn't prove. 41 felony rioting charges made in one night, and all of those felony rioting charges dropped within 12 hours. That's not a normal thing. That does not normally happen when you're conducting, how they describe sort of normal police conduct, the kind of police conduct that will supposedly all, be in complete danger if we don't have ongoing access to. To me, I think
but
this
Wyatt,
really sort of shows.
But Wyatt, come on, Wyatt. You're not being fair, Wyatt. Wyatt, you're not being fair. She wrote Black Lives Matter on that plaza in front of the White House. And so I don't know what you're complaining about, man. Everything else should be fine because she put Black Lives Matter on the plaza. Why are people giving her problems on this? Why is Black Lives Matter upset about it?
And it's not on the plaza. She took it back off the plaza. It's gone off the plaza. The one sort of achievement that local organizers could point to that, oh, wow, look, Mayor Bowser really cares. It's gone. The letters, the paint is gone. So, it's almost
okay,
as
so
if
fair enough. I'm
activists
wrong.
had fought and been tear gassed for no reason for months, right?
I'm wrong. You're right. She removed it, so fair enough. You guys can complain now. But maybe you still can't complain because at least you put it there. This is like, I hate the tokenism. And I hate this notion of, it's the same thing with, here's a black face instead of all of your economic problems. And it's like, what? So wait, you're telling me that her just being black in and of itself should be enough of a win as opposed to actually having policies to deal with the conditions and the situations to which the American public deals with? Like, it's that nonsense. It's the Black Lives Matter Plaza stuff. It's that. And then they're going behind you and just basically doing status quo. And, will balk at you pointing out. Let me ask you this, though. It is rational, infinitely rational, for the Democratic Party to basically use Black Lives Matter to get elected. Whether that's bringing George Floyd's family on, whether that's talking about that family, All of those things, despite the fact that the Democratic Party and Joe Biden was infinitely culpable in creating the mean-spirited criminal justice system that we have now that actually killed George Floyd. And for whatever reason, nobody points that out within the pageantry and everything else. It's like it's obscene. But it's rational. If you are a party and you don't want, or what you do want, you have a lot of blacks voting for you, and you don't want to create any sense of division within the context of all of these African Americans voting for you. You have a movement, Black Lives Matter, and that movement has been saying things that you don't particularly like. However, you don't want a division between those things. Well, you need to appropriate that somehow. You don't want that group out there given a secondary point of view in regards to the failings and the failures of the Democratic Party. So what do? If you're Joe Biden, if you're the party, you say, all right, we need to get some implicit association with that movement out there that's agitating, even if we can't acknowledge it outright, even if it's just vague. And so it becomes somewhat easy to bring his family on. It becomes somewhat easy to write Black Lives Matter on the plaza. Those things are easy in lieu of actually doing things to materially change and benefit and address what those people are out there protesting, whether they're black, white, gay, straight, or trans, to address the issues in your society. And so it's like, it's obvious. I said this months ago. And now I think you're seeing the culmination of it with the Joe Biden thing. I'm curious, how do you view this? I mean, you've been out at the protests, and I would imagine you've been talking to various people, whether that was in Portland or whether that was in D.C. How do they process what has been taking place in regards to this pageantry of an election in lieu of all of the stuff that's going on and agitating outside of the political space? How do they even view our political space at this point?
Well, the protesters everywhere I've been, are not stupid. They know what they're up against. They have a fairly acute understanding of the sort of media narratives that are being deployed against them. Those sort of media battles that they might have a little bit more like winning. And you're right, it is rational. It is easy and rational for the Democratic establishment to do what they're doing. It's not a surprise. It's the same strategy that they've been doing since well before Obama. I think of some people's surprise at what's happening is really indicative of sort of a lack of understanding of what the actual foundational role of the Democratic Party is. It is not here to actually help out in any way. It is here to serve as an obstacle between you and, as a member of the working class and progress. So in that sense, the Democratic Party is working perfectly. It is offering nothing and delivering nothing. And so, from that perspective, I also think it's perfectly rational from the perspective of the vast majority of the working class to not vote for that. That is also just as rational. If you're going to offer me nothing, then why would I waste my time voting for it? So
Wyatt, we only have a minute left, but I want to get your take. What is your optimism or ambition in the long run in the left in America to try to reshape the Democratic Party? Do you believe that's possible, or do you need something else?
I think we have an abundant history to point to over the past 60 years of why attempting to reform the Democratic Party is like Jonah attempting to reform the whale. I mean, they just, it's not how it works, That's about as much as I can give you there. It's a fool's end. If it worked, it would have worked already.
I hear you. Yeah, no, there's been a bunch done on that. And then the question, of course, is what's the alternative? And we have a minute left, and that question might be rhetorical, but go ahead, take it away. We've got maybe 30 seconds a minute.
Well, again, you're never going to get what you're not asking for. You're never going to get something that is not even on the table, right? So I would much rather have a chance of fighting and losing for what it is that I actually believe in than getting suckered into somebody else's poker game and having them run off with all my chips.
I hear you. All right. That was the voice of Wyatt Reed. Wyatt, Sputnik news analyst, producer for By Any Means Necessary. That show, by the way, airs on Radio Sputnik every Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. That's from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific. Again, Wyatt, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Al. It's always a pleasure to be on Footlines.
Yeah, good to have you. All right, we're gonna go into a break. We could have kept that conversation. It got. We could have. If we had another 15 minutes, we could have taken that last question, that last back and forth, and drawn that out into a whole other segment or more. But sadly, we've got to go into a break. Great show though so far. We're going to be speaking with Dr. Linwood Tauheed in this next segment about some economic issues. He's an associate professor of economics. We'll be back with him in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Tauheed. We have Dr. Linwood Tauheed coming on. He's an associate professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and a first-time guest. Dr. Tauheed, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing? I don't hear him. I thought we had him on.
Pleasure to be here.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry for a second. Yeah, the audio problem there, but very glad to have you. Anyway, we're talking economics. We're talking a couple of things. We might get into Apple in the next segment, the business Apple, that is. $2 trillion valuation. That's a big deal. We can come back to that, though. Let's start off with Trump's executive orders. Where do you see, in your opinion, looking at these as an economist, would you, for one thing, what do you think of them as policies? And for the second thing, where do you see these going legally? Again, maybe from a distance because you're working in economics, but do you think these are going to be implemented effectively? Do you think these are going to be stuck before they're implemented? What do you think this is going to, how do you think this is going to play out, Dr. Tauheed?
Well, I'm a political economist, so I may say a little bit about the politics. I think politics and economics are intrinsically connected. And so in terms of the politics of it, my opinion has been that this was actually a brilliant move by Trump to fill the gap, to step into the void that was left by the dysfunction of the Congress, the inability of the Senate and the House to agree on extension of the $600 a week benefits, to disagree, to not come to an agreement on the extension of the moratorium on evictions, and other things that were in those 4 executive orders. And so I think it's actually a brilliant move. Now, I should say this for your listeners, that I am not a Trump supporter, so I'm just trying to look at this as objectively as I can. And think that it was quite a certainly political move on his part to fill that gap that was missing by the dysfunction of the Congress. In terms of implementation, I had said a while back, in fact, when it was first initiated, this $400 was initially that the federal government, that Trump administration was going to put $400 a month, but states had to put in 100 of that 400. A week, $400 a week. The states had to put in 100 of that 400, but that's since been rescinded, and so states are not having to put anything in, and the federal government will put in $300 a week. And I said at the time that it would be political suicide for any entity, any state, any congressman or woman or any senator to try to stop this, to go to court, for example, and file a suit saying we don't think this should go forward. That would be political suicide. And to this date, no entity, as far as I know, at least no governmental entity has filed a suit. In fact, by my count this morning, there are 28 states that have either applied or already been approved for the $300 a week payout. And so states are falling in line, and these are not just states run by Republican governors, or there are also states that have been that are democratically controlled. And so states are falling in line. It's actually good politics for any governor to say, I'm going to take advantage of this, regardless of whether or not the money actually comes.
That's a good point.
So
I agree with you 1,000%. Yeah, I thought it was a political step.
Yeah.
Meaning Congress can do it. And so Trump, like you say, steps into the vacuum and say, I am your president. I'm going to do this. I'm tired of the suffering. I'm going to do something about it, whether it was legal or not. And, the legality of it, honestly, entirely just depends on whether somebody challenges it, which you made the point succinctly that it would be probably political suicide to do so. The other executive orders, but those are less workable, right? I mean, like Trump may be able to do this. Let me ask you this. Where is Trump getting the money from in order to even do a program like this? And however this particular executive order is perceived, what are the legalities of these orders?
Well, the legality, the money for the $300 a week payment is coming out of a FEMA fund that's authorized to make lost wage assistance to persons who have lost work in disasters. Now, declaring this a disaster is probably a no-brainer in this situation. We have almost $50 billion that's in that fund. Now, that's not enough to replace the $600 a week, that has expired. To give you a figure, there were about $250 billion paid out of the $600 a week fund over a 3-month period. Nearly $50 billion at $300 a week is equivalent to about $100 billion, right? Compared to $600 a week. And so my estimate is that money, that $50 billion, will last about 5 weeks of payments if that fund is not replenished. Now, I would imagine that since we're going into the election, once that fund gets near its depletion, that the Trump administration will ask the Congress to put more money in the fund to authorize another $50 billion. And again, I think any person in Congress who would vote that down would be committing suicide. So, there's lots being written that there's not enough money in the fund to take care of this problem, but I expect that money will be expended. But it's coming out of FEMA, and FEMA is the agency that is monitoring and distributing these funds.
And so as a political economist, how do you think, obviously the economy is one of the most important factors, maybe the most important factor going into an election. At the end of the day, if people are suffering at home, they're going to take that into the ballot box. So that's important. With that perspective in mind, assuming Trump, like you're saying, gets this to go through, it works, people benefit from it. Anybody who opposes it is shooting themselves in the foot. Assuming all of that is true, how do you think this is going to weigh on the election?
Well, we've got 4 aspects to this executive order. We've got a student loan, for example, payment deferment until the end of the year. Student loans are inadvertently are affecting young voters, young persons who would be young voters, who are not terribly enthused about the choices that they have, and may decide to sit this election out now. I think that would be a bad idea. But we have over about $1.6 trillion in student debt that's out there. many students are overwhelmed by this, particularly during this economic downturn. And so any hope for them that the Trump administration can give them may encourage them, or maybe not to vote for Trump, but not to vote at all. And so that they may have some warm feelings about that and decide, well, I just won't do anything, particularly since the Democratic candidates have rejected in large part some debt forgiveness proposals from Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And so the standard Democrats are not very well placed on this student loan thing. And that's the least controversial of the executive orders in terms of we're talking about federally guaranteed student loans. And so the government can defer payment on that whenever it wants to. So that's the least challenged in terms of illegality. The eviction moratorium is also huge, although the analysis of the executive order says that that really it's just smoke and mirrors. That this eviction order really doesn't extend the eviction that was or moratorium that was in the CARES Act, and it actually only authorizes a study. But we're talking about 30 to 40 million people who may be affected by evictions as that eviction moratorium collapses, ends on August the 24th. It was originally July 24th was extended for a month. It seems like 30 to 40 million people who may be homeless in a week.
One last quick question: what is your opinion on the payroll tax deferral, on the payments for Medicare, Social Security, on the deferral and Trump? It seems to me like that was, of the four executive orders, that was the most sort of Trumpian one. That was the one that was closest to Trump's ambitions going into his election and potentially a second term. There, he's talked about wanting to make cuts to that, potentially cutting that out entirely. What is your take on that order?
Yeah, my take on that is that the many analysts have been arguing that first of all, they've been looking at the fact that the Republicans have been wanting to eliminate Social Security since it was first passed under the Roosevelt administration, and that payroll taxes provide, in some sense, a legal justification for return on your investment. Your taxes are going into an insurance policy. And because you've paid your premium through your unemployment taxes, you have a right to your Social Security when you retire. And many are saying that if that payroll tax is eliminated, then that legal claim on that Social Security disappears. And that this is one way that the Republicans have wanted to destroy the Social Security system, by destroying the process of payments into it. I think that's probably part of the agenda here. It was well before the Trump administration that these kinds of things were proposed. And so, yeah, you're right. This is the most Trumpian because it goes back to some promises that the Republicans have been making, or at least some attempts that Republicans have been making for decades to eliminate Social Security. Now, I think that even if the payroll tax were to be eliminated completely, it'd be very difficult to dismantle the Social Security system. I'm from a school of thought in terms of economics that supports the idea. In fact, that I've worked on some research in terms of what's called modern monetary theory. And we would argue that taxes don't drive federal spending. And so there really is no definite connection between payroll taxes coming in and spending out of Social Security. We could eliminate the payroll tax completely and still find a way to support our seniors and those who are retired through a Social Security payment. Look, the CARES Act.
Doctor, not to interrupt real quick, but I'm sorry to interrupt real quick, Dr. Tauheed. But that's true. Looking at it as from an MMT perspective, basically, we're sovereign currency and we can pay for whatever we want. But from the politics of it, the country doesn't entirely know what MMT is. And they have in their heads that debt and that taxes basically fund spending. And so undermining the payroll tax thing is a way for people who basically don't accept MMT, even though it's, they accept it when they're using military spending, or they accept it when they're creating dollars out of thin air. But they don't roundly accept that. And so once you remove the payroll tax, basically an argument can be made that this is being paid for by a general fund, and at any point we could stop paying this, or we could find ways to basically undermine it and say, hey, let's pass this off to something else. Meaning the argument and the politics of it take on a different life the moment that you remove the payroll tax and the funding mechanism from Social Security. Is that fair? And by the way, let's do this. Let's take a break, and I'm going to let you answer that coming up in the next 15-minute block. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. This is Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Missouri and Kansas City, Dr. Tauhid Linwood. Dr. Linwood Tauhid, I'm sorry. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global political and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
We increase activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. We have with us Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Missouri and Kansas City, Dr. Linwood Tauhid. I interrupted just at the very end of the break because I was trying to divert it into a specific political point of view, meaning regardless of the logic of it, regardless of the reality of it, meaning, yeah, we can fund Social Security. Social Security is a service, just like the Postal Service. We can fund that. That is one of those things that go out, do a job for us. And that as a U.S. government, this is something we do because it's part and parcel to making our country work better. But that's not a foregone conclusion, especially when you had a right wing and a Democratic Party that was open to either privatizing it or getting rid of it, meaning it's always under threat. And wouldn't this be one of those ways of basically manifesting that threat, making it a literal thing? By eliminating the payroll tax cut. Trump said, if I'm not mistaken, he's going to get rid of it if he wins the election. Dr. Tauhid?
There we are. Am I still there?
Yeah. No, you are. We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. So let's get out of the theoretical into the practical, into implementation. If the payroll tax were to be eliminated today, persons who are receiving Social Security would still continue to receive Social Security, right? Those who have paid their necessary payments into the system in terms of months of earnings are going to have a claim on that, so they will still begin to continue to receive Social Security. And that's going to go on for a little while. And while it's going on, the public is going to see that, well, there are no Social Security taxes being paid, but we're still getting Social Security checks, so where's that money coming from? And so as a practical matter, the public will be educated through this process that payroll taxes are not necessary to support Social Security. In addition, if we were to just eliminate, even gradually, Social Security payments, that's going to have an immediate effect on the economy. I mean, seniors receive in Social Security a considerable amount of money. If that were to stop, this economy would go into a recession. And how do you get out of a recession? You begin to pass $2 trillion CARES Act packages with money created out of thin air. That's also a process by which the public will be educated into the idea that you don't really need taxes in order to drive an economy. And so if there were to be some decrease in Social Security, there would be an immediate recession effect in the economy, and that would be remedied by returning Social Security. Now, a bigger threat that you mentioned is the idea of privatization. That if you were to foul up the system in some way, then those Republicans and corporate Democrats also would try to make a case for privatization, that the private industry, private enterprise could do better in your Social Security payments than public funding. I think that's also a big hurdle for those who would argue that to get over, because Social Security is a very well-run system. And so I think without going into theory, the actual implementation of a Social Security cut or discontinuation would be very hard politically to get through.
But it's an ideologically driven issue. I mean, like, it's not like right now, you would think it would be very, very difficult. What?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was just saying it's an ideologically driven issue. But let me ask you this. One last question. Let me get one last question in, and let's move to Apple.
Go for it.
Early on, you made the point of saying that the youth have been somewhat dejected by the platform of Biden, basically ignoring and tokenization of Green New Deal or whatever else, and that because many of the policies that they want, that they explicitly need, being this vulnerable in the society, Biden basically told them to go vote for the other person, but they should still vote for Joe Biden. Now, explain, why should those people who are not going to get what they want politically, that if they have wanted, that they need in real terms, with 20, 30, 40, 50,000 debt on their back, why should they vote for one Joe Biden? Doesn't that incentivize Joe Biden to continue to take advantage of them or take them for granted?
Well, I mean, it seems as if the message to everyone who would possibly support Biden is to be afraid of Trump. That is, this is a message of fear. You should be afraid of the Trump administration. I'm finding in looking at, for example, protests around the country and around the world, that young people are not going to be driven by fear. Or if they're being driven by fear, they're afraid of the future in terms of not being able to pay off their student debt, not being able to have health insurance. The climate crisis is a big issue. So there are things out there that I think that if you're going to be afraid, that are much bigger to be afraid of than the Trump administration, or at least it's a wash. And so if you're going to attract young voters, you have to give them something of hope. And even Social Security, as it's being discussed, is that for the young people, there won't be any Social Security for you when you retire. And so something has to be different, and it has to be more than just getting rid of Trump. I mean, you have to have a positive message, not just a negative message. And in fact, in politics, negative campaigning just decreases voter turnout. It doesn't bring anybody to your side. It just makes people more uncertain about whether or not their vote is going to make a difference or not. So I think that's absolutely the wrong approach for the Democrats. But of course, it is the corporate Democrat approach, because things like Green New Deal and Medicare for All and student debt forgiveness doesn't benefit financial institutions.
Richard Zahid, I mean, I actually want to come back to the Social Security thing for just a second, just because there is one point I wanted to make on that, which is that there's a weird gridlock thing that's happened. again, not even, I broadly am in favor of Social Security, but not even stepping into the ideological thing, but just looking at it mechanically. The party you'd expect to oppose it, and historically has, coming from the right, also has a historically older voter base. You're just so demographically, the people who are going to be the beneficiaries, who've been paying into it, who are bought into it, literally, are not going to have an incentive, and therefore a large portion of the base who would be pushing back. If you had a more libertarian leaning, and for some on the left, this might sound ridiculous, but genuinely, if you had a more libertarian leaning Republican Party, where people, no matter what demographic they were in, they were more likely to oppose this stuff by the party line, I think you'd see more opposition. I just don't think it's politically feasible. But that's, again, that maybe we can come back to that, because we were going to talk about Apple. I want to get into this. Apple, the tech company Apple, recently passed $2 trillion, becoming the highest valued company in America, passing another, reaching that spot, basically. This is huge. Two ways we could take this conversation. I'm curious on your perspectives on both. One is Apple and other tech companies more broadly as a vehicle for the investor class, starting with the tech bubble in the late 90s. But again, over the last couple of decades, they remain a sort of constant in these a few waves, constant source for people to invest in. I'm curious how you would place that in our wider economy, whether that's proportionate to their role, whether that's disproportionate, what created that condition. So that's one path. And then the other one would be, we're in the middle of a pandemic. How the hell has Apple reached this $2 trillion valuation despite massive supply chain problems, despite people lacking money, all these rampant things? So maybe we can start with the second one. Dr. Tauhid, how did we get to this point? How is Apple so valuable despite the world being in such a state of crisis?
Well, there's a couple of things to think about in terms of valuation. Apple is valued at $2 trillion because its stock is valued at $2 trillion. That's not necessarily congruent with its value in terms of product, right? And so, look, Apple went from $1 trillion in 2018 to now $2 trillion. So it's increased its valuation by $1 trillion in 2 years. That seems like a bubble to me. It seems like the stock is being overvalued, and part of that overvaluation would have come out of the 2017 the Trump tax cut, the Tax and Jobs Act, and that caused Apple to bring back about $250 billion from overseas because tax rates were now lower here than they were in other places. That saved Apple $40 billion. Now, what it did with that was took $141 billion of that and bought back its own stock. And stock buybacks typically will increase the value of stocks. It's not just that the value of the company as a profit-generating entity stays the same, but it's divided among smaller shareholders, which of course increases the value of a share of stock. There's also
Dr. Tauhid, actually, I want to pause on that for just a second. I want to come back to Apple, but just with stock buybacks, just a quick explanation, and I want to get from you more on it, because you just stopped to sort of pause and look at that for a second. It's important to understand, I think. Basically, the idea is companies, of course, when they go public, they generate stocks, they sell those stocks, they go through more rounds where the sort of the value of those stocks is in some cases being dissipated or changed. Anyway, companies, as they make money, will then buy those stocks back. That tends, like you're saying, to increase the value of the companies. But critics of this process will look at it and be like, hey, why aren't you guys paying your employees more? Why aren't you investing this in more productive capacity? There are different ways you can criticize it, but broadly, is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. There's in economics, there's an idea what's called a principal agent problem. We have executives at corporations who are in control of the finance, and when things like stock buybacks occur, those executives who have much of their compensation in stock options, the value of those stock options are going to go up. That maybe in the short term is going to increase their wealth. But you're also taking money out of your treasury, out of your reserves, and you're buying back your own stock, which means that money in your reserves is not available
to pay employees. It's not available to improve the human capital knowledge base of your employees. It's not available to buy new plant and equipment. So it doesn't do anything for the future productivity of the company. And so you've got the money that's being diverted to executives through this process and to major shareholders instead of to the company. And so that creates a dilemma that in the short run, the executives will be advantaged and major shareholders will be advantaged. But in the long run, the company may find itself in trouble in terms of growth, which in the long run hurts those executives. But by that time, they may have moved on and gotten their golden parachutes and gone somewhere else.
Guys, we can come back on this. We've got to go out. Last show of the week, last hour. Great conversation, though. We'd love to have you back on soon. That was the voice of Dr. Linwood Tauheed, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Yeah, fascinating stuff there. I'd love to get him back on. We should talk about Apple more. We should get deeper into that. But we should also, we have an interesting stable of people from across the economic aisle. We've got a bunch of libertarian economists and a bunch of modern monetary theorists now. And that's an interesting divide to have. Nevertheless, we'll be back on Monday. Thank you so much for listening. We're going to close out our week of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
That was Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Guys, thank you again for joining us for the show. We had a really good, interesting show. There's sometimes I'm always interested when guests say certain things. And I know he gets it, like the political science of it. And he's like, it presents a dilemma because, these guys are in charge of the finances and you have all of these things that your company needs. And these guys have, what he's basically saying is a rational incentive based upon our capitalistic system that goods, cash, resources has a feedback of what am I looking for? Our system basically rewards people through cash, and that cash allows them more agency in our world. Meaning the reward of cash allowing you more agency in your world, more what you would consider power, your ability to do things, your ability to have access to things. Even when you have so much, you already have more. The understanding of it is a win for you to be able to appropriate more cash. Considering it gives you individually, more agency when you have a situation where you have the option to buy back stocks or pay your employees more. Every incentive in the world, especially from the feedback standpoint of I get more and I get the access and do more, goes to you buying back those stocks. Now, you can say, wait a minute, that hurts the company. You could say that, but this is personal, individual self-interest of somebody who's already greedy and rich. And so it would be weird for them not to do that. That's not a problem. That's a problem from the standpoint of how your system is arranged. Yes, that's a systemic problem from the standpoint of the let's say the positivities from the standpoint of you, the things that you get out of that process versus the entire whole of the organization. Yes. But if you're going to call that a problem for that is a problem for your entire government, because your entire political, economic system works that way. Meaning, whatever you define that particular issue, that particular problem to be, it's basically self-interest. That's not, you don't have to give it a really special economic name. It's self-interest, rational self-interest. How can I ingratiate myself to get more? And I am valuable for this company, infinitely so, more than those workers at those places. No, I'm going to give myself the ability to get more, and I'm going to buy those stocks back. Look, self-interest, whether it's a grifty politician in Washington, whether it's a company that decides to give themselves more in order to give their employees less, whatever you want to think about that has everything to do with an incentive for those people, for them to do what they're doing. Yeah. Of course, they're going to give themselves stock buybacks if it's going to increase the money in their pocket. Yes, that politician is going to take that cash and turn around and do those favors. Or, for the most part, dial back any sort of opposition on something that the Republicans are doing to allow something to walk. Why? Because 90% of the elections are chosen by the by the one with the most cash. And on top of that, spending 80 or 75% of your time begging for cash gives you a certain point of view of the world of those people that are giving you that cash to get elected. The American public, tertiary at best, when Joe Biden gave that speech, that speech was basically, choose me because I'm Joe Biden and I'm not Donald Trump. And maybe that's the honest signaling that you could ever get out of one of those candidates. So I'm going to end this here. I'm just going to say like, share, subscribe. Bilal Salam, thank you very much, Bilal. Please leave a comment. Wesley Walker Jr. gives a thumbs up. Thank you, Wesley Walker. And I will see you guys a little bit later today. Thanks, guys, for watching.